Let's get peppy. Welcome to PEP 210. This is PEP or Planet Extra podcast. I'm the host of, or a host of Planet America. That was controversial this week in the comments on ABC Australia, but this is not an official podcast of the ABCs. Repeat, not an official podcast. But on PEP, we do cover all the stuff that is too nerdy for TV. If you're listening, you can find us on YouTube at the PEP with Chaz and Dr. Dave channel, and you can also see highlights on the PEP Clips YouTube channel. You also find timestamps and show notes in our blurbs, and if you leave a comment under our current episode video, we're likely to see it. You can also tweet us or blue sky us at PEP CHASDRDAVE. If you want to chat to some fellow peppers, you can join our Discord server. It's on the screen now or in the blurb of the podcast. But if you want to contact me or Lockie the Lackey privately, why not email us? The address is producer@pepthepodcast.com. The address again is producer@pepthepodcast.com. But let's turn now to the lady who is very patiently waiting for me here. She will never raise the stakes in inconsequential views, even while she's waiting for my endless intro. It is New Orleans' finest journalist, Elle Hardy. Hello, Elle.
Hello, Chaz.
Let's just get straight into it because we've got so much to talk about. What are you grateful for, Elle, on this fine eve?
Morning for me. I am grateful for gratuitous and shameless opportunity for self-promotion. I just wanted to make note while I have the bully pulpit. Some friends and I have just launched a new podcast called Hell to Pay, and it's kind of like spiritually motivated crime and conflict. So we've covered like the weird like Calvinist sect that used to rule South Africa in apartheid that Elon Musk was very shaped by, kind of the real history behind the anti-abortion movement in the US, all that kind of stuff. So yeah, I think it's kind of cool. And if people want to check it out, it's called Hell to Pay.
What app are you up to?
We just released episode 9 yesterday.
Oh, wow. Well, there's a big backlog for people to get through because when they're finished getting through the PEP backlog.
Yeah, and I promise that it won't break your podcast app. Like 4-hour PEPs keep breaking mine.
I'm so sorry.
It's all right. It's a mere hour long. Episodes are a mere hour long. So
fantastic. So it's kind of it's the intersection between religion and crime.
Yeah, and just conflict and problems in the world, sort of historically and today. So,
just America or the whole world?
No, global. So it's with myself and my friend Arma, who's Bahrainian Canadian, and my friend Sipo, who's South African.
Fantastic. Okay, well, we've given it a right plug there. Hell to Pay. You can get it anywhere.
Anywhere you get good podcasts, and on Substack, and we're going to be putting it on YouTube soon.
Fantastic. Well, for me, what I'm grateful for is so easy, this podcast. It is this clip right here.
Are you seriously considering a third term, Mr. President, even though it's prohibited by the Constitution? Or is this about staying politically viable?
I will say this. So many people want me to do it. Mm-hmm. I have never had requests so strong as that. But it's something that, to the best of my knowledge, you're not allowed to do. Mm-hmm. I don't know if that's constitutional that they're not allowing you to do it or anything else, but there are many people selling the 2028 hat. But this is not something I'm looking to do. I'm looking to have 4 great years and turn it over to somebody, ideally a great Republican to carry it forward. But I think we're going to have 4 years, and I think 4 years is plenty of time to do something really spectacular.
You know, I don't care that he doesn't understand the Constitution. I don't care that he insists on every time he talks about this saying how much people want him to run again. I don't care. I hate this third term issue so much. It's never going to happen, never in a million years. But the question is, how much damage is Trump going to do to America before he decides to give up? How long will the court case go? How many goes at the Supreme Court will he have? Will there be riots? Will there be violence? How much does he have to put America through the shit before he accepts that he is not going to actually get a third term? And the answer, according to that clip, it would suggest nothing. It would suggest he can just accept it, which would be lovely if that's true. Now, I know he can change his mind. He often does. I know tomorrow he could say something completely different. I know in 3 years he could say something completely different. But Trump usually keeps his options open. That's what he usually does. He usually does, I don't know. Who knows? We'll find out. We'll see. That's what he normally does. And to the extent that he is choosing to not keep his options open there in that clip, for the first time that I know of, he's actually reduced his options. I am so grateful for that. Just once, Trump, please don't automatically choose the worst possible option in order to troll your opponents. Please. I was so relieved when I heard that. Fingers crossed, Elle. That's what I'm grateful for.
Yeah, see, I'm old enough to remember when he said, Project 2025, don't know anything about that, don't even know these guys. And, that was pretty swiftly turned around. So I'll believe it when I see it. I mean, he's frantically raising money with his super PAC right now, and that can be used for 2026 midterms, which seemingly would be quite prudent, given they'll probably have a lot of opposition. But yeah, I wouldn't. I get what you mean, but I won't believe that he's ruled it out until someone else's name is on the ballot, and even then, yeah. That's
fair enough. That's totally fair enough. I did put in the little disclaimer about I know he can change his mind and all the rest of it, but you're absolutely right. Maybe I'm leaping way too far to be put it in the grateful category, but honestly, even the slightest concession in this issue, I am grateful for because I hate this issue so much. But anyway, that's what I'm grateful for to the extent it's real, which may be 0.0001%. Then I am 0.001% grateful. Let's get into the updates. First of all, a few quick updates on stuff we've been talking about for the last few weeks where there's been some new news. Harvard. Trump has now explicitly announced that Harvard is going to lose their tax exemption. He did it with a tweet. On Truth Social, he tweeted out, "We are going to be taking away Harvard's tax-exempt status. It's what they deserve." I don't know what that means. That's not exactly a rigorous legal opinion. Was that just something he was feeling at the time? Or did he get advice from one of his lawyers? Has he just ordered one of his lawyers what's going to happen? I don't know. But I do remember back on April 15 when White House spokesman Harrison Field said, quote, "Any forthcoming actions by the IRS will be conducted independently of the president." Sure. All I would say, though, is regardless of whether Trump thinks he's just ordered for the tax-exempt status of Harvard to go or not, it doesn't really matter. This is not going to be an easy court case for Trump at all. Harvard has
extremely illegal.
Yeah,
the president cannot order someone be audited.
What he is saying, that's not what he's saying. What his lawyers will say is that until now, tax-exempt status has automatically been invested in any educational institution, right? Except for one, which is Bob Jones University, which back in the early 80s, they refused to give up a ban on interracial dating. And the Supreme Court finagled a weird, finely worded ruling that said, well, if it's against public policy or whatever, you can get rid of their tax exemption. That is the argument that they're going to make. They can say, well, if you can do it for Bob Jones under those circumstances, we can do it for Harvard because they're anti-Semitic. That's against public policy. That's what they would argue. Now, I would say, obviously, Harvard is not anti-Semitic. They may have had anti-Semitic students doing anti-Semitic things at some point in time, but they've also just put out a report into this where they have mea culpa'd. They have said these were the problems of the past. We are going to fix them. That doesn't sound like an anti-Semitic institution to me. It sounds like an institution trying to address their concerns. So that's not like Bob Jones. Bob Jones had no report into interracial dating saying, well, we made a big mistake there. Bob Jones was very keen on keeping the ban on interracial dating going for 5 or 6 years while they're arguing with the IRS. So that is a very different situation. But it's not just that. Harvard has also lawyered up. Well, they have unlimited money to take it to court. They've lawyered up with a bunch of conservative legal stars, like the absolute all-star bench of conservative representation for the Supreme Court. They're clearly like targeting the Supreme Court, micro-targeting the Supreme Court. I already talked you guys through about how unlikely Trump was to win this case, because it wasn't just that the ruling in 1982 completely contradicted everything that the Supreme Court has said for the last 5 years. But on top of that, even then, it took a bunch of lefties changing, basically just going back on everything they'd said back in 1982 to finagle the Bob Jones situation. It would need a miracle to convince people like Gorsuch to just go completely back on everything he said for the last 5 years. Maybe they'll pull it off. I don't know. I'm just saying it's going to be a really tough lawsuit for them to win. Probably the toughest, I reckon, other than the birthright citizenship, which they're just not going to win that one. And it's not going to help Trump at all to arbitrarily announce the tax break is gone via Truth Social with no process and no logic whatsoever. So that he'll regret that, I feel. What are your thoughts?
Well, yeah, I was actually just frantically trying to look up how many Supreme Court justices have degrees from Harvard, because you know the way that Americans are really, really tribal about their universities.
Yeah.
And I mean, I can already see certainly some of them here. Yeah, I mean, Gorsuch went to Harvard. Yeah. This is kind of, I think it is, yeah, it is kind of playing with fire, because I'm sure this kind of stuff does come into question. I guess my only thoughts, I did want to add in, I mean, the Bob Jones University case was how Catholic conservatives got evangelicals to be anti-abortion. So it's actually the podcast episode I mentioned, we looked at that, and that was evangelicals like Jerry Falwell were fine with the Roe v. Wade when it came out. It wasn't 6 years later until they started opposing it, and how a Catholic activist managed to get them, Paul Weyrich managed to get them in the tent, was by, you know, getting them to become these arch conservatives, was through the Bob Jones University case, because they created these, you know, essentially segregation academies to try and subvert desegregation of schools. And then it was, the Bob Jones University case. It was really that the anti-abortion movement was sort of covering for them. So, yeah, just a bit of a historical note.
So you're saying the way that the evangelicals attracted the Catholics into the...
Catholic conservatives.
Other way around.
Yeah.
Okay. The way Catholics attracted evangelicals into the anti-abortion politics was by hanging as bait, banning interracial dating.
Yeah, the Bob Jones University case, because all of these private segregation academies, they were kind of colloquially called, especially in the South, were created by white evangelical families that were, you know, doing white flight to, you know, building all these new suburbs and new schools to avoid desegregation. Right. And they were basically able to combine the two issues and really get all of these white Southern evangelicals into the conservative tent and become hardcore Reaganites.
Okay. Well, I was going to say, on this note, we shouldn't really put too much stock on anything Trump says, because he seems very confused these days about Harvard. He was asked about Harvard in a town hall, and I'm not sure if you've seen this, but the results were interesting.
Mr. President, thank you for your time. It's interesting that you brought up Harvard, because when people think about Harvard, what they're basically talking about is they're asking, what do you say to those who view your actions as an attack on academic freedom rather than a defense of fairness? What do you say to that?
Well, I say this. We had riots in Harlem, in Harlem, and frankly, if you look at what's gone on, and people from Harlem went up and they protested, Stephen, and they protested very strongly against Harvard. They happened to be on my side. You know, I got a very high black vote. You know that. Very, very high black vote. It was a very great compliment to me. I did criminal justice reform. I did opportunity zones for one of the greatest economic deals ever for the black and Hispanic community. I got tremendous. They agree with what I'm doing with respect to Harvard.
That's really sounds like he's phoning in from a deck chair in Mar-a-Lago.
It does. He's certainly got that vibe.
That is up there with the you know how he went through that thing where he couldn't stop talking about Hannibal Lecter?
Yes.
Because he obviously had confused like insane asylums with asylum seekers.
Yes.
And
yes.
he dusted that back off the other week. Yeah, I just love the way his synapses kind of, you can see it happening in real time. You can see him just connecting and a little light bulb going off.
Yeah. Okay, to be fair, I'm sure he presumably misheard Harlem for Harvard and misheard Harvard as Harlem, sorry. And they tried to save it. But honestly, that was the worst save I think I've ever heard from Trump. It was so unconvincing and just so confused. And that's that same town hall, he had all kinds of issues, actually. I think you're right. I think his brain was on a deck chair, even if he physically was not. There was, at one point in time, an absolute classic moment, which I'll play, why not, where the crowd thought he was joking about not making mistakes. Like he said, I never make mistakes. And the crowd thought it was a laugh line. But it wasn't a laugh line. I'll just play it.
Lee says, what's the biggest mistake you think you've made in the first 100 days?
I'll tell you, that's the toughest question I can have because I don't really believe I've made
You
mistakes.
made any mistakes?
We're in a transition period. We're in a transition period.
I think Lee is reassured.
I think you're going to see tremendous economic victories over the next period of a year, like far greater than ever imagined. Right now, as I said, we're losing billions and billions of dollars on trade. We're going to make billions and billions of dollars, but it takes a little while. That doesn't happen overnight, but it will happen much faster than people understand.
All right.
When Bill O'Reilly is taking the piss out of you, you know that you've really, really stuffed up. It's I can't believe Bill O'Reilly's still alive. That was the biggest headline out of that clip. But anyway, I do have a question for you on this, though, Elle. I've just played a couple of little, Trump being slightly senile kind of clips. But it's a bit of an update on the MS-13 Knuckles clip we played last week. Like when Trump...
Oh, yeah, the tattoos.
Yeah, Trump was absolutely sure that MS-13 was written on the guy's knuckles. He just wouldn't let it go. Jacob Sullum from Reason asked an excellent question, I thought, which I'm going to ask you now. If Trump was senile, whether you think he's senile now or becoming senile now or becomes senile later on, bear in mind, he's got 4 more years. He'll be older than Biden was by the end of his term. So if Trump becomes senile at some point in time, how would we know? What are the symptoms? Like Jacob Sullum gave an example that was a bit different from the MS-13 one. The example he gave was he knew that Trump tweeted out the following, that he wanted to, quote, penalise Canada for the sale into our country of large amounts of fentanyl by tariffing the value of this horrible and deadly drug in order to make it more costly to distribute and buy. Now, if you think about that for a second, that makes no sense whatsoever. Leaving aside,
you're going to legalise it first?
Yeah, that's right. Leaving aside the fact that Canada obviously only allows a few kilos of fentanyl to come in per year, he's saying he wants to impose tariffs on an illegal product, yes, to make it costly to distribute and buy. Criminals don't pay tariffs, generally speaking. So, yes, that is very stupid. But I personally think the MS-13 clip was a much better example. If Joe Biden had done that, if Joe Biden had been in that clip that we played last week, 12 months ago, I promise you that would have been Exhibit A of him having to resign tomorrow. People are just going, oh my God, he's completely lost his brain. He has to go. And people saw that and they laughed and they said, oh my God, Trump, what a moron. But they weren't saying he's senile, he has to go. So how would we know if he did become senile?
Yeah, well, it's interesting you say that because Ronald Reagan basically faced this. He was diagnosed with Alzheimer's in 1994. But in hindsight now, a lot of people close to him, his family, his aides were saying when he was going through the Iran-Contra scandal in 1986-87, even when they were, first started the 2 illegal foreign policies in 1985, that Reagan wasn't really all there. They were starting to notice that he was a bit confused. I mean, it's a difficult question because some of it, are they kind of trying to protect his legacy and rewrite history? a little, but there certainly seems enough people that were saying, oh, he was a little bit confused, a little bit out of it, starting to get a bit angry, depressed, very, very common, well-known symptoms now. And there was a time when the aides were having to look at, potentially invoking the amendment, and they didn't. But yeah, I mean, I guess Reagan had the similar kind of magnetic personality, and cult of personality around him, is probably, the closest presidency that we do see to Trump. And, people weren't stepping in. They were, people were saying, oh, well, we're just going to go and enact this policy and not tell him. We've just got to make sure that he can, get on stage and deliver his lines. So, yeah, I just don't see, I'm fairly convinced that the, especially with the sycophancy around Trump, we're not going to know, but I can't really see people telling us now. And I think that they would, find workarounds to make sure, they're all enacting his agenda. They know what it is. If that needs to happen, they surely will. But just another thing I would mention, with that just refusal to back down, if anyone hasn't seen, there's a relatively recent film, The Apprentice, about Roy Cohn, the famous mob lawyer who mentored Trump, and the young Trump. And it's really good because it shows that how he really, really tutored him to never, ever back down, whether it's in a courtroom, in front of media, and to just always go on the attack, and always say I'm right. So it's quite interesting if people are interested, and it's just a good film anyway, to go back and sort of see that historic training that was really implanted in him, and that you can really see, to the end today.
We've had quite a few people draw comparisons between Roy Cohn and Steve Miller, but we will get to that later on when we get to the Steve Miller
that's
section.
A really good point.
Yeah.
Trust me, Steve Miller. Yeah, he's absolutely going to be one of those people I'm talking about who's steering the ship if they can see behind the scenes that Trump's losing it.
Well, I genuinely, I said this last week, I'm not convinced that Stephen Miller isn't the real president right now. I'm not saying Trump makes no decisions, but I'm just saying it seems to me that Stephen Miller is the source of a lot of the misinformation that Trump believes.
Even in Signalgate, we saw him kind of step in and say, like, even over the top of J.D. Vance, and said, guys, that's not what I heard, get back on track.
Totally.
Yeah, he very much seems the brain of the organization.
Very much
for want
so.
of a better word.
Yeah. North Carolina, got an update on that one as well. I told you a few weeks back about how the North Carolina Supreme Court judicial election from November 2024 was still going on because the candidate who lost by about 734 votes, he's a Republican judge called Griffin, he's refusing to accept the outcome and has continued to try and get thousands of votes from Democrat-dominant counties only. He's trying to get them thrown out. He went all the way through the state court system. Many of his challenges have actually been thrown out during that process. But the state Supreme Court did uphold a few of them, which took us then to the federal district court. And this week, the federal district court judge threw out all of Griffin's challenges and said the Board of Elections should certify the Democratic Judge Riggs the winner. The judge, by the way, Judge Myers, was importantly a Trump appointee. So if we go through these remaining challenges quickly, military and overseas absentee voters were not required to send in photo ID on the election day. In fact, they had no facility to send in photo ID even if they wanted to. The North Carolina Supreme Court held they should be given 30 days to prove they have photo ID. Judge Myers said, no. Overseas military and civilian voters followed the rules as they existed at the time of the election. Yes, they did. But the retroactive change in voting procedure at issue here deprives them of their fundamental right to have their votes counted. He also said that invalidating their votes now would violate their due process rights, and that requiring military and overseas absentee voters in one county to undertake additional efforts to have their votes counted, while similar voters in other counties don't have to make that same effort, is a constitutional violation of the Equal Protection Clause. I 100% agree. The fact that Griffin was only asking voters in Democratic dominant counties to jump through these hoops was always the most obviously illegal aspect of his challenge, in my view. Also, Griffin challenged a few hundred votes from people who said they'd never lived in North Carolina but were connected to the state through their parents. The North Carolina Supreme Court majority agreed, don't count those votes. Judge Meier said while the state does have an interest in limiting the right to vote to residents, it shouldn't risk throwing out votes from people who may live in the state. Quote, the court finds that post-election ballot disqualification for individuals erroneously designated as never residents constitutes a substantial burden on the right to vote. And he particularly objected to, in my view, the next most obviously illegal aspect of Griffin's challenges, the fact that changes were suggested to the rules after the election. He wrote, this case concerns whether the federal constitution permits a state to alter the rules of an election after the fact and apply those changes retroactively to only a select group of voters, and in doing so treats those voters differently than other similarly situated individuals. The case is also about whether a state may redefine its class of eligible voters but offer no process to those who may have been misclassified as ineligible. To this court, the answer to each of those questions is no. Griffin can still appeal, of course, but after this ruling from a Trump judge, I find it highly unlikely that the Court of Appeals is going to overturn that ruling. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I very much agree with you. You're the legal expert. Yeah, I just think it's interesting because, people sort of say, oh, why are they constantly bringing these cases that seem futile or, just so flagrantly illegal? I think it's interesting. It's kind of like an asymmetric warfare. I think it's just this constant idea of just constantly pushing the boundaries, constantly, probing for a weakness, probing for an Eileen Cannon to be on the, to be sitting in the chair or, and I think it's just that thing. It's that relentlessness of these attacks of constantly trying to challenge the law, do illegal things. I guess just the question I have is, are they going to run out of steam? Is it going to be, is after a year of fun, people going to get sick of this stuff and turn their heads towards 2026 midterms? Or is this going to be the nature of the administration for the next 4 years?
Yeah. I think the analogy or the metaphor, the best metaphor to describe what you were just saying before is I don't have the wording off the top of my head. This is really off the top of my head, but I remember vaguely a famous metaphor used by Lenin, Vladimir Lenin, to drawing an analogy of a war and saying when you when you probe with your bayonet, if you experience no resistance, keep on pushing. If you experience resistance, then probe somewhere else and see if you experience no resistance. Keep on going. I think he might have been appropriating someone from before, maybe Napoleon or something. I don't remember exactly. I haven't researched it. This is a distant memory, but it's that kind of feeling, I think, is what you're describing.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Now, this next one has a sting. Unfortunately, since we're doing Zoom, there is no stings, but Lockie will put it over the top. So we'll just pause and just imagine the eagle sting.
Eagle's
Woo! That is my favourite sting. I'm glad we could introduce you to that, Elle. Okay, so this is obviously about the Eagle Ed Martin Jr. Ed Martin's confirmation vote to be the US Attorney for Washington, D.C. is in serious trouble at the moment. Elle, he's a bit of a favourite of the pod. I don't know if you've heard us talk about him. I love talking about Eagle Ed Martin Jr. He could be the biggest hack in Washington. That is a very big hack we're talking about there. And the US Attorney for Washington, D.C. basically makes all prosecutorial decisions about government officials. So it's a super important position. It is a hugely important position. For instance, I told podcast viewers a few months back about how Eagle Ed let an assault charge slide against a Republican congressman who was beating his mistress, and there was an awful lot of evidence against this Corey Mills, and he just let it slide to try and preserve a vote in the House of Reps, presumably. If you recall, Eagle Ed needs to be confirmed by May 20, or he will have to be replaced by someone else. May 20 is now less than 2 weeks away, and the Democrats can use committee rules to hold his vote up for a whole week. So Republicans are running out of time to get him confirmed. They've got 7 days, basically. The problem is Democrats are insisting, well, a problem is that Democrats are insisting on a public hearing so they can ask him some questions. They've already submitted over 500 questions for Eagle-Ed, and the chair of the committee, Chuck Grassley, really doesn't want to give them a hearing because I suspect he knows what Eagle-Ed Martin Jr. is like and will be like in a hearing. I don't think it's even clear that Republican senators even want Eagle-Ed to get the position. Grassley still hasn't scheduled a vote on the nomination. He says Martin still hasn't submitted all his paperwork, whatever that means. Meanwhile, it's leaked out that Tom Tillis is a definite no on Martin, and Trump has been ringing Tillis up to pressure him. So far, no dice. We should also note that in the past, Martin has attacked Senators Susan Collins, Mitch McConnell, Lisa Murkowski, and John Cornyn. So maybe he just doesn't have the votes. The too bad, Ed. Trump finally yesterday tweeted out a very strange appeal for Ed Martin. Ed Martin is going through the approval process to be U.S. Attorney in the District of Columbia. According to many, but in particular Robert F. Kennedy Jr., his approval is imperative in terms of doing all that has to be done to save lives and to make America healthy again. This is a passion for Ed, more so than almost anyone that I have seen. Huh? What? I'm not saying he's never done anything health-related, but if he has, it passed me by. Normally, he's just been a hack for Republicans. I mean, he's looking to be the U.S. Attorney in Washington, D.C. What does that have to do with health reform? I have absolutely no... Anyway, Senator Dick
Might be
Durbin.
a tallow fry guy.
Maybe.
Just likes his fries, cooked in beef fat.
It could be that. I don't know. I don't know what they're talking about. I honestly don't know. Anyway, Democratic Senator Dick Durbin, the ranking member of the Senate Judiciary Committee, said, "It's my understanding we're not going to move forward on the Martin nomination." So we'll see. They effectively have 1 more week. Do you have any thoughts about this or Ed Martin Jr. in any way?
No, I mean, it's just good that Democrats are finally kind of flexing their muscles on this stuff, seeing as they let so many, pretty dodgy nominations go through to the keeper. So, I'm not really across Eagle-Ed, unfortunately, but I will continue to let you update me.
That's okay. There's about 20 hours in the back catalogue of PEP that you can listen to about Eagle-Ed.
I do listen to PEP. I just don't always get through all 4 hours.
Honestly, you don't need to justify yourself, Elle. You are a human being with a job. I 100% understand. Medicaid update, final update. I spoke at some length about how Republicans are desperately hoping to find $880 billion worth of cuts out of Medicaid to make their tax bill work. Turns out, new complication. That complication has 5 letters, Trump. Politico has been speaking to 6 White House officials and top allies of Trump. They say that while Trump has agreed to target waste, fraud, and abuse, he remains profoundly wary about pursuing anything that might be construed as cuts to Medicaid, given he's vowed over and over again to protect it. And that is true. He has. Trump, quote, "Trump is definitely not convinced on reductions in Medicaid spending. His own instincts are that politically it's not good, and Trump's political instincts are pretty good," says this anonymous source. One of the ideas that Trump is banding around, apparently, is to slash drug costs by linking government payments for pharmaceuticals to lower prices paid abroad, which is once again Trump stealing a policy that the Democrats are running with that he then tried to get rid of, and now he's trying to bring it back as himself, as his own policy, which is interesting. But anyway, if he did that, the government would spend less on Medicaid and save money. It would be popular. Government regulation on drug prices could rub Republicans the wrong way, though. So we'll see if they go for it. And it might not save enough money anyway. $880 billion is a lot of money to save. So we'll see. Any thoughts about any of that?
No, I'm happy to move on.
Okay, let's move on to the main story of the week, which is, of course, Mike Waltz. Mike Waltz, of course, got sacked from being Trump's national security advisor at the end of last week. Trump appointed him his UN ambassador. He sold that as a serious appointment, even though, I mean, yesterday he was actually pretending that the UN appointment was a promotion of sorts.
Yes.
I actually think it's a higher position than one another too. I think it's an upgrade. Nick moving up there is an upgrade. Geoffrey, he's going to the United Nations to me, I think it's personally, if I had a choice for myself of doing, I'd rather have that job than the other.
Are you convinced, Elle?
Absolutely not. I do think one of the interesting things that's come out since his first presidency is how much he regretted a lot of the early firings that he did. I mean, probably with the exception of Scaramucci and a couple of others. And he sort of felt like he allowed himself to kind of get railroaded by the media into them. So I think that's why he's just kind of obsessed with not firing people, even though, you know, ironically, I mean, what is he famous for? Like having a TV show where he fires people. But yeah, I think we're going to see a lot of like shuffling of the deck chairs around this kind of stuff just to be perceived not to be giving in to the media.
Yeah, no, I'm going to ask you a lot of questions about the theory behind the sackings in a second. But I obviously I agree with you that I'm not convinced about the UN thing. Let's not forget, Trump wanted Elise Stefanik to fill that role.
I was about to say that, yeah.
Yeah, but then he decided that saving one Republican out of the 535 people in Congress was more important than the UN ambassador position. And I think that says it all about what his priorities are. And mind you, saving one Republican, potentially only for a couple of months, although she might have their replacement might have lost their seat, I guess. But it wasn't just Waltz getting sacked anyway. It was his deputy, Alex Wong, and he definitely didn't get a promotion. He got a promotion to the unemployed queue, Alex Wong. So there's something going on there. It's not a promotion. Fair to say, it came out of nowhere. This was State Department spokesperson Tammy Bruce being told in the middle of a press conference that her boss was about to be acting national security advisor. And she didn't seem exactly thrilled, in my view, to be ambushed like that.
In the first row.
Something has just come out from the president.
Yeah.
So
All right, great. Terrific.
The president has just written on Truth Social that Mike Waltz is going to become the new U.S. ambassador to the United Nations.
Well, there
Therefore,
you
no
go.
longer the National Security
Fabulous.
Advisor. And in addition to that, he says that in the interim, Secretary of State Marco Rubio will serve as National Security Advisor while continuing his strong leadership at the State Department. Do you know how long he's going to be serving in both roles?
It is clear that I just heard this from you. This is the magic.
No heads up that this was coming today?
I have some insights as to the potential of certain things that might happen.
It's called thinking on your feet, kids.
Yeah, she seemed underwhelmed. Okay, so let's get to the many questions I have to ask you. First of all, Elle, was it Signalgate that got Waltz sacked 6 weeks later?
At a guess, yeah. I mean, if we know one thing about Trump, he doesn't like being embarrassed and looking silly. And it, you know, even though they, you know, were just on the front foot constantly about this is all Geoffrey Goldberg's fault, they did look a bit ridiculous. So, yeah, I mean, and there's also, you know, historically, he was the you know, perhaps the most least MAGA-y appointment in you know, of those, you know, the senior team around Trump. And there was, you know, already a lot of rumors that a lot of people didn't like him. I mean, I even think it's funny that he's going to the UN because, you know, Elise Stefanik was, you know, was always happy to be a kind of MAGA dancing bear. And, you know, she would have been doing all the Agenda 2021 stuff at the UN. And, you know, she would have just been, you know, getting up and asking, you know, George Soros questions and things like that. And Mike Waltz, like, for all his faults, at least seems to have a, you know, semi-serious kind of sober background that he might actually, you know, take the job somewhat seriously and not just put on the clown shoes. So I do think that's interesting. But I mean, another really interesting thing, you can see that Iran-Contra's on my brain at the moment because I've been writing about it for my book. But I mean, one of the really major factors behind Iran-Contra was the coming together of, you know, what they used to call the imperial presidency. And it started with Eisenhower, but it was that consolidating the role of national security advisor and the CIA under the president, and really, taking power away from the Secretary of State. And that's, each president sort of gradually did it more and more. And a lot of people see that is kind of a lot of the genesis of Iran-Contra, was that the president was just able to run their own foreign policy via using the national security advisors and the CIA. So it is actually interesting that Trump is getting Rubio, is sort of giving him that power again, when, every president has sort of worked to take it away, to undermine the Secretary of State and effectively just make them a bit of a toothless diplomat.
Ironically, by putting Rubio there, he's on one hand getting the Secretary of State really involved with the NSA, but also some might argue that he's also taking control himself, because the reason he's put Rubio there is because Rubio's his doggy. But look, you've actually answered about 2 or 3 of my questions in a row there. but I'll just go back to Signalgate for a second, and then we'll continue on with some of the other areas you're going there. I mean, I do think that Signalgate, to answer my own question, I think that Signalgate played a role, but was not everything, but it was part of it. You might recall at the time there was a lot of scuttlebutt that Trump was furious about Signalgate, not because of the security implications, of course. He didn't care about them. Not even because of the scandal, in my view. You said he was embarrassed. I don't even think he was because he was embarrassed. I mean, I'm reading his mind there. I might be wrong. I think it's just because it meant Geoffrey Goldberg, who was an enemy of the administration, was in Mike Waltz's contacts. I think that was the issue. I think Trump was laser focused on that issue. How exactly did he get into your contacts? And we should go over that quickly, because this was Mike Waltz's explanation for how Jeff Goldberg's contact ended up in his phone.
So your staffer did not put his contact information.
No,
but how did it end up in your phone?
Well, that's what we're trying to figure out.
Okay, but that's a pretty big problem.
That's what we've got the best technical minds, right?
That's disturbing.
And that's where, I mean, I'm sure everybody out there has had a contact where it was said one person and then a different phone number.
But you've never talked to him before, so how's the number on your phone? I mean, I'm not an expert in any of this, but it's just curious. How's the number on your phone?
Well, if you have somebody else's contact and then then somehow it gets sucked in.
Oh, someone sent you that
It gets sucked in.
Gets sucked in, Elle. Gets sucked in.
That's the very technical term.
Yes. Now, look, The Guardian did run with a story that they were admittedly fed from the White House that seemed to actually make that explanation make sense, in my view. It seemed to dot all the I's, cross all the T's. I'll just read you out the direct quote from The Guardian. I have read this out before, both on Play America and on this pod, but this is going somewhere. According to 3 people briefed on the internal investigation, Goldberg had emailed the campaign about a story that criticised Trump for his attitude towards wounded service members. This is during the election, the suckers and losers story, right? To push back against the story, the campaign enlisted the help of Waltz, their national security surrogate. Goldberg's email was forwarded to then Trump spokesperson Brian Hughes, who then copied and pasted the content of the email, including the signature block with Goldberg's phone number in it, into a text message that he sent to Waltz so that he could be briefed on the forthcoming story. According to the White House, the number was erroneously saved during a contact suggestion update by Waltz's iPhone. The mistake went unnoticed until last month when Waltz sought to add Hughes to the Signal group chat, but ended up adding Goldberg's number to the 13th of March message chain named Houthi PC Small Group. Now, to me, that all makes perfect sense. And I would believe that entirely, except for one thing, before I ask you your view. Geoffrey Goldberg was not being very subtle about what he thought happened. First, he was quoted as saying, "This isn't the Matrix. Phone numbers don't just get sucked into other phones. I don't know what he's talking about. My phone number was in his phone because my phone number is in his phone." He's telling everyone he's never met me or spoken to me. That's simply not true. And then this is the new clip, which I was directed to by John Barron. I don't know why he didn't put it on our show last Friday, but whatever. This is a brand new clip for you. This is what Goldberg said on his own show, Washington Week.
There is an explanation for why my phone number was in Mike Waltz's phone. And very frequently in reporting, we find out that the obvious explanation is the correct.
Do you have a theory, though,
yeah.
Jeff, about like...
Aha! Pretty clear to me what Goldberg is implying there, that Waltz is his source. Also, given that there's no way Trump would have even understood that explanation from The Guardian, I wouldn't be surprised if Waltz lost Trump's trust right then and there for good. Trump didn't want to give the media a scalp, so he sat on for 6 weeks and then pulled the trigger now. Okay, so that's all that. My question to you is, after I've shown you all the evidence I've got, what do you think happened? Do you think Waltz is his source, or do you believe the Guardian story?
No, I mean, that's definitely journalist speak for, I can't reveal my sources, but he is my source. Yeah, that is very, very compelling. And I think your whole theory is compelling as well. Yeah. I mean, look, it does make sense, because I was thinking there is that, like, I'm in a group chat and someone updated their number like yesterday, and yeah, it just comes up that you can automatically, update all these numbers. So that's certainly plausible, but it does kind of sound like it's been retrofitted. I mean, Geoffrey Goldberg is, he went over to Israel to be an IDF guard when he was a kid. Like, he's a hawk. He's friends with your neocon, with all those sorts of guys. He has very good contacts in foreign policy and military circles. Even though he's a now perceived, liberal enemy of the administration, he knows all of these people. It's certainly highly plausible that he's known Mike Waltz for a long time, and that they do talk, and that he's the kind of person that might be an outlet for your traditional neocon types that are being sidelined by MAGA, America First type policy.
Absolutely. And especially given what happened directly after that, which is when, in my view, Signalgate got even worse for Mike Waltz. And this hasn't been mentioned much. But in the days after Signalgate, the press went kind of feral, looking at all of Hegseth and Waltz's many low-security breadcrumbs that they'd left all over the internet. Hegseth, in particular, just does not know what internet security is, and just left all these, like 10 accounts for various apps unlocked with all his details and stuff, so he's really easy to hack. But Mike Waltz left what appeared to be his Venmo profile public, and it disclosed the names of hundreds of his personal and professional associates. Now, Geoffrey Goldberg was not there, but a bunch of media personalities were, such as Brett Baer, such as Brian Kilmeade, but in particular, Brianna Keilar and Kristen Holmes from CNN. Brianna Keilar, in particular, is no fan of the administration. So Mike Waltz definitely likes chatting to the enemy, and don't tell me Trump wasn't made aware of that. So I reckon that that would have stuck with him as well. Just one more little dessert course on the Signal saga before we go to the next question. It turns out that from this photo here...
I was about to mention this.
Yes, taken during the last cabinet meeting. But why don't you tell us about it, since you were about to mention it?
Well, the photo was taken, and it shows that they're actually using a duplicate copy of the app called Telemessage.
That's right.
Which people think is most likely due to the requirement that the presidential records are retained, whereas Signal will automatically delete these messages after a certain amount of time. And it showed, the contacts list. There was clearly J.D. Vance. Who else was in there? I mean, it was the all-star, the cabinet all-stars.
Rubio was there.
Yeah. From that very kind of Stalinist cabinet meeting. And I mean, I think it was just yesterday that the app has now been taken down because 404 Media, which is a really good tech reporting website, were able to put through, to show them that there'd been a security breach already in this app. And I believe I think they're saying it's based in Seattle, but I saw some early reporting that they believe it's an Israeli company that owns the app. Again, Israel is the kind of place where those tech companies are very, very tightly intertwined with the defense force and the government.
Yes.
It's just, just the whole thing is very, very sus, and just incredible that they've been able to circumvent, presidential and cabinet security protocols to be able to do this.
Absolutely, yeah. The telemessage is supposed to be the least secure way you can possibly use Signal. And you mentioned the Israeli thing. Phil, corresponded with us, and actually he was onto this immediately. As soon as that 404 article came out, he sent me an email saying, do you know the company was founded? Telemessage was founded by an ex-head of planning and development for one of the IDF's intelligence elite technical units. So Phil made the point that at the very least Israel is probably well across all of Mike Waltz's messages. So, which is very interesting. So there you go. All right, my next question for you, Al, on this topic. We've already asked if it's Signalgate. Was it Laura Loomer? Is the next question.
I mean, that is reading the tea leaves a bit, but I mean, we already know that she's had, she does have some degree of influence.
Yeah. She was there after Signalgate.
Yeah, and leaks have come out that she seems to have a direct line. I mean, that was an incredible thing. I don't know if you saw the Geoffrey Goldberg, the Atlantic interview with Trump himself last week, and Goldberg managed to get Trump's number and called him, and Trump, I think, was on the golf course and just picked up and was like, "Oh, unknown number, who's this?" Which everyone has sort of pointed out, the only person in the world that is still picking up unknown numbers happens to be the president of the United States. Yeah. But yeah, it made the point that he has, none of the security protocols that normally, with the president, famously they had to, the Secret Service had to corral Obama into giving up his BlackBerry. And he didn't want to do it, but eventually, on advice, he did. And it seems like Trump's still got, his, Samsung or whatever, and is just operating it just like a, normal old bloke on a phone and just picking up random numbers.
Can you remind, while we're talking about this topic, can you remind us of who Laura Loomer is and just so people understand the significance of if she's the one behind sackings?
Okay, yeah. So she is I'm going into the memory recesses here. So she has sort of been a far right kind of social media influencer. She's had various media gigs. I think probably most famously came to greater attention. She got banned from Twitter when they were doing a lot of cracking down on people. I think she had said she tried to launch some sort of crusade against Uber Eats as well for some anti-Islam. She's always been a very big anti-Islam gal, and when she got banned,
it was Uber drivers. She said that the Uber drivers, too many of them are Muslims. She said.
Yeah, and I think that might have been what got her banned from Twitter. And then she famously chained herself to the door of Twitter and said, it was a free speech violation.
Just one door. Just one door.
Yeah, just one door.
So people
and there was a reporter that was there and said, staffers were just walking through and just going, what the fuck's that? And then, so somehow she's kind of, she was very much on the lunar right and sort of like a lot of people like your Milo Yiannopoulos and stuff like that, who got banned and deplatformed and kind of went away. She sort of, somehow sort of wiggled her way back into MAGA land. And she's, I don't think it's unfair to say that she's a pretty unhinged figure. She's had a lot of work done to her face. She's very strange acting and looking person. And probably, I mean, of all of the cast of characters in MAGA world, she's probably kind of the most bizarre, but seems to have, there've been all sorts of speculations about, if she's having an affair or whatever, but seems to have a direct line to the president, which is just all entirely bizarre.
I mean, I don't want to focus on the plastic surgery aspect of it, but you're right, it is a bit weird because you might, if I'm about to play a clip of her and you'll see for yourself, she's 31. You would never pick that she is 31.
I did not know she was 31. I thought she was, at least 40.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. It's because she's just ruined her face that it just makes her look older. Like she must have had that work done when she was in her mid-20s because she's been like that for a while, which is, a little bit sad, really. But I mean, you described, how she is. I mean, you could say she's a denizen of the LOOMERED. She very much owns that space of just really crazy online types. And if we go back for a second to April 2, when she last visited, I'm going to give you what I've collected. On April 2, she visited Trump, and we've had it confirmed. She got fired 6 members of Mike Waltz's staff. She said that they were disloyal. And I've got the quote from her talking to a podcast about this exact experience, and you'll see why it's relevant.
Did you express any concerns to him about Mike Waltz?
My focus was more on his deputy, Alex Wong, and the other individuals who Michael Waltz himself personally proclaimed to the president that he personally vetted. And so my concern was, if Michael Waltz is the NSC director or the NSC advisor, and he is saying that he's personally vetting these individuals who have a history of anti-Trump remarks and anti-Trump associations, why would he be signing off on them? And then it reminded me of a video that I've saved in my phone for many years of Michael Waltz on video speaking out against President Trump when he first ran for president, accusing him of being against service members. And so, I was about to show this video to President Trump, and then Michael Waltz, walked into the Oval Office. So there goes my conversation completely interrupted.
And this is the video that she was referring to. By the way, I've got it for you. I'll play it to you in full. It's from an anti-Trump PAC in 2016.
I'm Lieutenant Colonel Michael Waltz. I've served multiple tours in Afghanistan as a Special Forces commander, and I'm here to tell you the truth about Donald Trump. Donald Trump hasn't served this country a day in his life. Essentially dodged the draft in Vietnam through multiple deferments. Went to boarding school, says it was so tough he felt like he was in the military. He essentially called anyone who was captured in combat a loser. It's something that I just personally can't stomach and I'm sickened by, as should every veteran and every soldier in the United States military. Here is a man that I don't think is tough in any way, shape, or form. He's been fed through a silver spoon. He's hidden behind the laws of our nation in terms of bankruptcy. He's hidden behind veterans organizations, and he certainly has not really stepped forward in terms of personal sacrifice to serve this country. Don't let Trump fool you. Look into his real record and stop Trump now.
American Future Fund is responsible for the content of this advertising.
Interesting video, don't you think, Elle? I can see why she'd want to play that to Trump.
Interesting that his vetting team didn't find that. You think it would be, if she was able to find it or someone was able to send it to her, you think it'd be relatively easy for his vetting team, for Trump's vetting team to have seen something like that.
I don't think we should assume that Trump hasn't seen it. It's not like Trump. It's not like Trump doesn't sometimes forgive people who suck up to him afterwards. Look at Rubio.
That's true.
Rubio did a month of poor stand-up comedy about Trump's genitals. And he's there. He is. He's in every single role in the administration.
Yeah, JD Vance.
Yeah, totally. So she says she didn't play. She hasn't had a chance to play that to Trump since. So maybe he hasn't seen it. Maybe he has. I don't know. But then Loomer went on.
So if you can't stomach it, why do you want to work for President Trump? If you can't stomach it, why do you want to work in the administration?
So, Laura, essentially, you walked into that meeting trying to fire Michael Waltz, too.
No, I was not trying to fire Michael Waltz. My question is if Michael Waltz is telling the president of the United States that these people are good people that he personally signed off on and that he personally vetted, well, what does a Michael Waltz vet entail? And is it biased given the fact that he himself has made anti-Trump comments in the past? I wasn't trying to get him removed. I was just making the point that, he's not exactly a Trump loyalist. Like, my idea of what it means to be a Trump loyalist is different from what it means for Michael Waltz, who's on camera lying about President Trump, saying that he called service members losers.
Sure, you weren't trying to get him sacked, Laura. But regardless, Laura's message would have been clear, I think, to Trump, especially given Mike Waltz didn't sack everyone that she was in Trump's ear about. Remember, she said she was focusing on his deputy, Alex Wong, who wasn't sacked. I suspect Trump noticed that Alex Wong wasn't sacked. According to some anonymous White House senior official who spoke to Axios, that this whole escapade worked as well. The quote was, "He's like a beaten dog, this Waltz, that keeps doing the same trick so he doesn't get beaten again. It's a little sad. When you stack everything on Waltz, he just couldn't survive. Laura Loomer gets a confirmed kill," he says. And Loomer herself is also taking credit. She shared a post about Alex Wong's firing with the word scalp. And according to NBC reporter Dasha Burns, after Mike Waltz got sacked, Burns received a message from Laura Loomer that simply said one word, "loomered." So what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, look, it's. I think the evidence certainly leans in that direction. But I mean, I suppose at the same time, it's also favourable for her to make sure that people know that she has a direct line to the president, or that she's claiming this victory regardless of whether it's her. I imagine. But yeah, the evidence certainly looks like she. Kind of did a lot of the background work before the decision was made, at the very least.
Yeah, and I've got two more theories here, which I want to throw at you. One, this is a result of an ideological battle, which you've already touched on. That was another thing you touched on straight away, which is that there are definitely two schools of foreign policy and administration. The Hawks started off as being Marco Rubio, Mike Waltz, and Pete Hegseth. But Marco Rubio is backed into the hedge like Homer Simpson. He's just saying whatever Trump wants him to say. Pete Hegseth he's just a yes man, so he doesn't have any ideology as far as I can see in reality. He'll just say whatever Trump wants as well. So that leaves Waltz. And lately, Steve Witkoff has been growing in influence on the other side, and he's definitely not hawkish at all. My understanding is that he was the only one, Waltz, who was constantly pushing to increase sanctions against Russia for not negotiating good faith with Ukraine. That would have been a lonely position, I imagine, to take in the Trump administration over the last 3 months. And we cut to this week, and the New York Post runs this exclusive article headlined, "Steve Witkoff shouldn't be leading Iran-Russia negotiations, allies and insiders say." This article was chock full of anonymous administration insiders dumping shit all over Steve Witkoff for how bad a negotiator he is. Like, for instance, this quote from an anonymous insider. "Nice guy, but a bumbling fucking idiot. He should not be doing this alone." And it also had on-the-record quotes from the Foundation for Defense of Democracy. Now, we need to note, the New York Post is a hawk publication. The Foundation for Defense of Democracy is a hawkish group. So Charlie Kirk tweets out, "The Foundation for Defense of Democracies is leading the anti-Witkoff operation. They are openly calling for people in the administration to undermine President Trump and stop a deal with Iran. The anti-Witkoff forces are anti-MAGA." And then Don Jr. forwards Charlie Kirk's tweet, adding, "Deep state neocons are smearing Steve Witkoff because they're trying to undermine my father's foreign policy agenda. The establishment wants forever war." Note also that Waltz hired a number of his underlings from the Foundation for Defense of Democracy. Some of the underlings that Laura Loomer didn't like very much. This all happened the day before Waltz was fired. So, Elle, was it a turf war?
Yeah, I mean, so I think that's the one thing that's fairly unquestionable here, is that there was this kind of battle was going to happen. And I mean, I think you and Dave even talked about it when he was appointed, that he was quite an outlier appointment compared to a lot of other people in the cabinet. And yeah, look, this stuff we certainly know is going on. I mean, Trump has just completely overturned Republican orthodoxy for decades, on hawkish, essentially neocon-led foreign policy. So just the infrastructure in conservative circles in Washington and defense and foreign policy establishments is still very seeped in this. So it's always going to pop up, and there's, you know, there's enough ideologues, certainly on the Trump side of things, you know, the Trump Bannon, Miller kind of group that are trying to reshape this in their image, that are certainly very up for the fight.
My final theory, which I want to throw to you, is that maybe Mike Waltz was just personally not very good. Firstly, we've noted that he tried to retain his dignity, which is always a problem in the Trump administration. Unlike everyone else in the administration, when you think about it, the administration is filled with flunkies, people who have achieved nothing on their own merits. Wickoff, what the hell has he done? Hegseth, what has he done? Like, these people are 0 stars. They're Z graders, right? But Mike Waltz, he has actual achievements of his own. He won 4 Bronze Stars while serving in US Special Forces. That's a decorated military career. He worked at the Pentagon during the George W. Bush administration. He has valuable experience. He was elected to 4 terms in Congress in his own right. So, yeah, Kristi Noem, she's done nothing. Kash Patel, what the hell has he done? Nothing. But Mike Waltz, he actually has some achievements and gravitas of his own. And that might be a source of tension right there if Waltz was trying to run his own race, whereas everyone else was just slavering after Trump. Also, according to The Atlantic, he clashed with Trump's chief of staff, Susie Wiles, who found him dismissive and arrogant. That seems to be a common thread between people on the outs with Trump. Remember, Musk was exactly the same. He pissed off Susie Wiles. Very soon afterwards, he disappears. Right?
Yes. So did Ron DeSantis.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
There was a great article about Susie Wiles. The Daily Beast or something had a really fantastic long read about her and how she, really white-anted Ron DeSantis and just completely got him out of the picture because of something that he'd done to her a few years early in Florida.
Yeah. So maybe don't piss off Susie Wiles. But more importantly, Waltz seems to also have run a dysfunctional shop. Mark Halperin was the guy who actually broke the story about Waltz. He was the first one, the Waltz sacking story. He got there first. So he had a source who was real. Like, the source told him stuff. And that same source told him this.
The West Wing's unhappy, the State Department, the Treasury, unhappiness. And of course, this was around before Signalgate. It was widely reported that Signalgate, ironically, may have saved Waltz's job because the president didn't want to be seen as if he were giving in to Geoffrey Goldberg, his new best friend. But there's lots of levels of unhappiness. And it's less about Signalgate than it is about, as I understand it from my sources, a general belief that it's not being run efficiently in an organized way.
Now, this may not have been all Waltz's fault. He was tasked by Trump when he got there on day one to sack scores of career officials, which he did. But new hiring was delayed by the whole White House general dysfunction and cuts and the frenzy of Doge, cut. So many of the offices have stayed empty. Then you got the Loomer sackings, which didn't help. So he's constantly understaffed, but the knock on him is that he was also both disliked and ineffective. And the thing about an NSA, National Security Advisor, they can either be a chief foreign policy advisor to the president, or they can be a chief, and also a chief spokesperson for the president's policy, or they can be a behind-the-scenes coordinator who ensures that everyone's all on the same page, smoothing over differences. They're the two different schools of NSA. Well, Waltz can't be a chief foreign policy advisor because he's won out with his foreign policy views. He disagrees with the president. So he can't be the president's foreign policy advisor. And he couldn't be the smoothing behind-the-scenes guy because most of the cabinet didn't like him and he was utterly dysfunctional anyway, apparently, which suggests he was just a poor selection for this particular job. And just his personality and what he brought to the table wasn't right for the position. I mean, I don't know, but I'm just trying to just piece all this together. Does that seem like it makes sense to you or not?
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And yeah, as you mentioned, he actually has this career behind him. He has contacts and things like that. if you look at almost everyone else in the administration in senior roles, they owe almost everything to Trump. You know, there's a lot of nobodies there with no power base, with no following, with no real media career behind them. I mean, I suppose with the exception of Hegseth. But yeah, these are people who owe everything to the big guy. And Walz is one of those people that has independent contacts, independent sources of power, you know, potentially independent funding, all those sorts of things. So you can kind of see why he was, you know, sort of first overboard when, you know, when things weren't going perfectly well.
Yeah. And look, and to be honest, if that's right, it's probably a good idea to sack him. I mean, I'm not sure he's adding anything at this point, to be honest. I barely saw him for the last month. He wasn't even doing TV. And if Trump won't let you go on TV to defend him, you might as well be dead. So, so like, I mean, yeah, the bottom line is the president should have staff that he wants, especially a role like this, which isn't even Senate confirmed. It's just the president at the president's pleasure. If the president's not pleased, you should get out of here. So I'm not going to fault Trump for sacking him, to be honest. I mean, I suppose it depends what the actual reason is. I've just thrown 4 reasons. My suspicion is it's all 4, but I don't know.
Yeah, I'm with you. And I mean, yeah, another thing that we know very well about Trump is that he wants to be told what he wants to hear. And just on the basis that Waltz isn't, you know, we think might not be completely craven and just, you know, tell, you know, that he has got this background in other things. He does have knowledge. He does have a different ideology, that he just might not have been telling Trump exactly what he wants to hear.
Maybe. All right, so who's next? We got Marco Rubio there at the moment, just supposedly for the next 6 months. Rubio said he was prepared to serve both roles. Generally considered not to be a good idea to do both roles. Kissinger did both roles and he got a lot of people offside because obviously the National Security Advisor is supposed to coordinate between the Secretary of State and Defence and other people. If you're the Secretary of State, you might be a little bit biased. There's talk of long-term replacements being Witkoff or Miller. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, trying to compare, I mean, as much as, you know, I think Henry Kissinger was a war criminal who should have, you know, who should have been tried at The Hague. He was a much more substantial figure than Marco Rubio. And, you know, Marco Rubio has worked out that his one path to power is by becoming, you know, this yes man. But yeah, I mean, Steve Witkoff, I think he started as the Middle East envoy, didn't he? And he's been very front and center in Russia-Ukraine negotiations. So he seems to be spreading his power base. So I guess my money would probably be on him. But, you know, trying to predict anything with this administration is a fool's errand.
This might sound ridiculous, given I mean, I haven't hidden my distaste for Stephen Miller, but in a way, I actually think that Stephen Miller could be the right pick for Trump. And the reason why is because NSA really should be an organizational role. It should be someone who is, because they're not going to do the foreign policy thinking for Trump. It should be someone who's coordinating. Miller has a reputation for being the best organizer in the administration by a mile. Like, for all his flaws, he's organized. The Homeland Security Council, which he's in charge of, apparently runs like clockwork. Apparently runs very well with almost no staff at all. The problem, of course, is that Steve Miller would basically be the acting president if he took over domestic and foreign policy at the same time. And we don't want Steve Miller to be the acting president. But anyway, that's just something that just occurred to me. I don't know if Trump thinks like that, but if he wants someone to just organize, I mean, maybe Steve Miller is the right one. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I always thought his focus was much more domestic. But I mean, if he did, you know, want the job, I think he seems sort of competent and Machiavellian enough to probably be able to wing his way into it. You know, and it just depended if they wanted to tie, I mean, which they've already sort of done, but, you know, if they really wanted to tie in the anti-immigration stance with national security even further, you know, I think we all know where the Tren de Agua stuff all came from. You know, if he really wanted to go for the jugular, getting that role, you know, that could really be how he cements his legacy and his ideas.
And like you said, when you look at the Signal Gate chat, when Steve Miller just parachuted in and just settled everything, He was being the national security advisor right then and there. That's the job. Mike Waltz was organising signal chats, and Steve Miller was actually coordinating. So it was interesting. We got a lot of correspondence about Steve Miller. Like I said before, like I teased. Polite Body, please have a look at the side-by-side images of Roy Cohn and Steve Miller. Trump is having a regressive enemy, thinking Steve is Roy. To be honest, it's not far from the truth. And here we go. What do you reckon?
Oof. Yeah, if he spends some time in a sunbed, or just takes up smoking 2 packs a day, he'll look like him in no time.
We can see where Trump got the tan idea from, can't we? From certainly the orange came from Roy Cohn from looks of things.
Yeah, he actually kind of looks like an amalgam of RFK, RFK Jr. and Steve Miller.
It's a good call. Neil Anderson also wrote, do you think Stephen Miller watched the Where's My Roy Cohn documentary and thought to himself, I could become that guy? So the peppers are onto that one. But it's not just that. Neil kept on going. Neil also suggested that Steve Miller looks like Colonel Klink from Hogan's Heroes, trying to explain why no escapes could possibly occur. And he even sends a little clip.
My prisoners? Impossible. There's never been an escape from Stalag 13.
Not bad. And finally, Tom says, every time I see Steve Miller on TV, I can't help but see Buster Bluth. So Lockie whipped this one up for us as well. I don't know. I think I'd stick with Roy Cohn. What do you reckon?
Yeah, probably more Roy Cohn, but I mean, the whole administration does have an air of arrested development about it anyway. So, yeah, you can see how the line's drawn.
Yeah, yes. Yeah, there's a bit too much warmth for Buster Bluth, I feel, for Stephen Miller. Whereas Roy Cohn has that sociopath vibe that I think you need for Steve Miller. But anyway, before we leave Mike Waltz, I want to point out the biggest failing that he had, which doomed him. A complete inability to suck up in humiliating fashion. You mentioned the cabinet meeting, the Stasi cabinet meeting. This was Mike Waltz's effort at the last cabinet meeting. You wouldn't have seen this because it didn't get much coverage because it was,
Mr. President, in the last 4 years, the world experienced a total lack of zero leadership under Biden. And then we've had 100 days of your leadership with respect, with strength.
Very underwhelming.
Yeah, very low energy.
Very low energy. Pathetic, Waltz, if I may say. Let Pam Bondi show you how it's done.
President, your first 100 days has far exceeded that of any other presidency in this country. Ever. Never seen anything like it. Thank you.
That's how it's done, you see? No dignity left. None. Zero. All used up. And then seconds later, she says this.
Your DOJ agencies have seized more than 22 million fentanyl pills, 3,400 kilos of fentanyl since you've been your last 100 days, which saved, are you ready for this, media? 258 million lives.
Mike Waltz would never do that. He'd never do that. You see? That's what he's missing. And by the way, that 258 million lives saved stat is particularly impressive because literally only 2 days earlier, Pam Bondi was tweeting that the same number of kilos of fentanyl seized would actually save 119 million lives. So what a big few days Trump had there, saving over 100 million extra lives without a single extra kilo of fentanyl seized. In case you're wondering, by the way, from October 2023 to September 2024, 87,000 people died from all drug overdoses combined, not 258 million people. I've no idea what happened to the numbers after that because it takes a while for them to come through. But I think it was somewhat short of 258 million people dying every few months before Trump got into power. You might be wondering how they came up with that number. I did look into it. A DOJ spokesperson said that they multiplied the 3,400 kilograms seized by its current purity level and then divided that amount into 2 milligram doses because apparently that's all it takes for some people to die, yielding about 258 million individual deadly doses. So actually, if you think about it, they were quite restrained with that stat. Because if they'd assumed it was 100% pure fentanyl rather than the current standard purity that's seized, it would have been 1.7 billion lives. I did the maths, which is more than America and China put together. But I do have some bad news for Pam Bondi while we're doing the maths. Using that logic, which of course is perfect in every way, last fiscal year, Joe Biden captured 9.5 tons of fentanyl, which means he saved 4.8 billion lives in just 1 year. Amazing stuff.
Wow. I mean, that's basically half the world,
More,
right? Not
more.
What's it? Yeah, more.
It's an incredible effort. So
yeah,
anyway.
they should get Pam should be the one that counts Trump's crowd numbers.
That's exactly. Pam should. That is like if she gets sacked or promoted. That's what she should get promoted to be.
Yeah,
the
there's like
crowd
nightclub
counter.
things where someone just stands there with the clicker to see how many people have come in. Yeah, just give it to Pam.
Ma'am, imagine how strong her thumb would be at the end of that night.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
Millions of clicks. Anyway.
Yeah, just have one in each hand and just, yeah.
Elle, I want you to go nuts with the Ukraine-Russia thing. This is it seems every time I get you on, I get you to talk about Ukraine. I'm sorry about that.
No, I'm sorry. Sorry if people have to keep listening to me on it.
But a lot's
okay.
been happening. A lot's been happening. Why don't you go back to before the proposed peace deal from America, back when things were looking a bit tense, leading up to that and going through to the peace deal. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Hang on. I'm just ready to go because I've already got so many notes. I was just going to start from Trump's peace note, but if you want to go, if you want to do before that, okay.
Don't let me stop you. You just start talking.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it was 2 weeks ago when Trump put forward his peace plan. That basically gives Crimea to Russia, recognizes Moscow's de facto occupation of Luhansk, Donetsk, Kherson, Zaporozhye.
Yep.
And then in return, Ukraine would get a small part of the Kharkiv region, and then passage along the Dnipro River, which is sort of a real front line in the war. Also included a promise that Ukraine would not become part of NATO, but left the possibility open that they should be part of the EU. It would lift the sanctions imposed on Russia since 2014. And boost economic cooperation between the US and Russia, particularly when it comes to energy and industry, which I imagine is really referring to minerals, because Russia's got a lot of the good stuff, and it would freeze Ukrainian front lines and grant Ukraine some security guarantees, but didn't really say what they were going to be. So it would essentially almost be ending the war, everyone shake hands where you are now. And yeah, needless to say, the Ukrainians weren't thrilled with that.
Before you go on, can you just, when you talk about the land, about recognizing those 4 provinces that I'm not going to try to pronounce, and and Crimea, there's a bunch of Latin being thrown around. There's de facto and de jure being thrown around, where Crimea was a de jure recognition by the US, and the other 4 provinces were de facto recognition by all parties. Can you just explain the difference for people on that?
You're the legal mind here.
Okay.
I think
I'm happy to.
I think you should do it.
No problems. Okay, well, look, basically, de jure means full recognition, like absolutely official recognition. Crimea, part of Russia, when you say de jure recognition of Russia, but only by America. It just said America would offer de jure. It didn't say anything about what Ukraine should do. So Ukraine can say whatever they like about Russia and Crimea. The rest of the world can say whatever they like, but under the terms of the deal, America would recognize as a proper official country Crimea as part of Russia. Sorry, not country, as a province, part of Russia. And that is important for reasons we'll get into in a second. But as for the de facto thing with the other 4 provinces, that was recognition by all parties, the de facto recognition. But de facto means that's not official recognition. No one is considering those 4 provinces as actually part of Russia. America and Ukraine would both consider it to be Ukrainian territory that has been purloined by Russia, but that they occupy at the moment, and we practically can't get rid of them at this moment. But we do not recognize them as actually having the right to own that property, to own those lands. And so at some point in time down the track, they should come back to Ukraine. That Russia does not have the right to those 4 provinces. They just practically are on the land and we can't get rid of them. So that's very different kinds of recognition. And my understanding is, the reason why this is so important is because my understanding is Ukraine isn't down on de facto recognition. They recognize the reality of the situation, that they are not going to push Russia off all that land. That's just not going to happen. But they just cannot recognize Russia as the rightful owners of that land. They just cannot. And in particular, that's the case with Crimea as well. They don't like de jure recognition because that is official recognition, and it's part of their constitution that they will not recognize Crimea as part of Russia. They just won't. They can't. They legally can't. If a Ukrainian politician agreed to do that, they'd be gone tomorrow. They cannot. And Trump was very angry about Zelensky saying that, because Zelensky was very open. He said Ukraine will not legally recognize the occupation of Crimea. There's nothing to talk about here. This is against our constitution. And Trump tweeted out, nobody is asking Zelensky to recognize Crimea as Russian territory. But if he wants Crimea, why didn't they fight for it 11 years ago when it was handed over to Russia without a shot being fired? It's inflammatory statements like Zelensky's that makes it so difficult to settle this war. He has nothing to boast about. The situation for Ukraine is dire. He can have peace or he can fight for another 3 years before losing the whole country. Now, I don't know if Trump's history is correct there. You can tell me. I've got no idea. But what I do know is the reason Trump was so angry was because presumably they specifically wanted in the negotiations Ukraine to do whatever they like. And it was just America doing the de jure thing, but Ukraine reacted very poorly to that, presumably because by America recognizing Russia properly as the proper owners of that land, it makes it that much more likely everyone else will as well.
Yeah, very much so. Just going back to the types of recognition, it was something very smart that Russia did immediately when they entered these various territories, was that they would always hold those snap elections. And they'd make sure that the local Ukrainian mayor was in jail or whatever, and they had a, puppet candidate. So I think what they're essentially trying to do is say, well, these people have to determine themselves. And look, they've voted for, this guy who happens to, happens to be a Russian oligarch or whatever, who's in the seat. So I think Russia has been prepared for this sort of eventuality for a long time. And Russia have really been masters of frozen conflicts. They've done this, all in parts, of Georgia, and former Soviet countries for a long time. So they're pretty well versed in how to do this and how to use it as a negotiating tactic. I think the thing, Crimea really is the huge issue. And I've been saying for 3 years or whatever that have been going on this program, which isn't always popular, Russia will never, ever, ever give up Crimea. They will happily let this just mumble on as a frozen conflict or low-level conflict, whatever is needed to do. They will not give it up. It's, Crimea was for centuries has been empires, the Ottomans and the Russians and all that have gone back and forth because it is such a strategic location. It is, for trade, for as a port, but also as a navy, as a military installation. Is it within how many miles? It's within 20 miles or something like that of both Turkey and Romania, which are both NATO countries and obviously very key to the region. I had it written down somewhere. I think it's 25 miles or something like that. And also it will permanently hinder the Ukrainian economy and not to mention military if they have it. And I mean, that's ultimately what they really want is Ukrainian to be a poor vassal state that's next door, that is just completely subservient to Russia. So they were never, ever going to give that up. I think the real problem for Zelensky is that, like you said, it's in the Constitution. I think any sort of peace negotiation is really going to open him up to a coup or at the very least an election defeat to hardliners. And it's, he has already done some maneuvering. He sort of got rid of his big military rival last year, I think it was, with some probably in mind that, if anyone was going to do it to him, that's him. But you can imagine that the second that I think most Ukrainians want an end, want negotiations. It's fairly clear in opinion polling. They don't want to give anything up, but they don't want to really keep fighting. People will say that you want to keep fighting the war, but there's so many evidence points that there is a real war fatigue in the country right now. But at the same time, that it makes Zelensky personally very, very vulnerable. And in doing these negotiations, I mean, it's the same. It's the same with Putin. The people the anti-Putin forces in Russia are to the right of him. They're more nationalistic. They're more hawkish. They're more hardline. I mean, he's just jailed one of his generals, on very spurious corruption charges, Ivan Popov. And he is starting to look at, some hard right elements around him and just making sure that if we're at the negotiating table, that he's not going to have the real hard right people coming to, knock on his door. And I think it's just such a risk for Zelensky. And I just feel so sorry for the bloke that it's impossible. He's in an impossible position, whatever he does.
I should also say that it was a terrible decision, in my view, from America to propose the de jure recognition of Crimea rather than de facto. Number one, because Russia conceded basically nothing, as far as I can see, with this offer. So that at least would be a concession from Russia to concede only de facto recognition. And I think Zelensky would have accepted de facto recognition because he's got no other choice. Like, he's just not going to get it back, right? But as you said, but also, it's not just against the Ukrainian constitution; it's against what America has promised as well. In that, like Zelensky was very subtle. Oh, maybe it wasn't subtle. He was a little subtle with his reaction to this, which was after Trump went crazy, he went nuts about his bitter tweet and was all angry about Zelensky. Zelensky, at the end of the day, tweeted out the following: "Emotions have run high today, but it is good that 5 countries met to bring peace closer. Ukraine, the USA, the UK, France and Germany. The sides expressed their views and respectfully received each other's positions. It's important that each side was not just a participant but contributed meaningfully. The American side shared its vision. Ukraine and other Europeans presented their inputs. And we hope that's exactly such joint work that will lead to lasting peace. We're grateful to partners. Ukraine will always act in accordance with the Constitution, and we're absolutely sure our partners, in particular the USA, will act in line with its strong decisions." Now, that seems conciliatory. I say it seems conciliatory because you'll notice on the tweet which I've just put the screen cap up of, he attached a copy of the Crimea Declaration from 2018, which was Trump's first term, if you've forgotten. And the Crimea Declaration states, "The United States rejects Russia's attempted annexation of Crimea and pledges to maintain this policy until Ukraine's territorial integrity is restored." So it's specifically American policy to never recognize Russia as the de jure owner of Crimea. And Zelensky was very subtly just pointing that out with that tweet. Not to mention that Marco Rubio in 2022 literally co-sponsored a bill that would have banned the US from acknowledging Russian sovereignty over Crimea. But let's leave that aside. And also it would be the first time since World War II that a state used military power to expand its borders at the European country's expense. So it would just open the floodgates to potentially more captured land and war and etc. down the track. But anyway, my point is that I understand a lot of what America was trying to get at there, but the Dure thing, they should have just done de facto. It seems to me the most obvious mistake. That I don't understand why they couldn't force Russia to even that tiny concession.
Yeah, I mean, I would just suspect that Russia has said no. There's a red line there. Like I said, Crimea is the big thing. They would give up everything else before that.
But they've still got it. De facto, they've still got it.
I know, but it's just such a I mean, what's interesting though, I think, and I mean, we'll kind of come on to Zelensky's counterpoint. It's very clear now that he's seen the writing on the wall, and that they are, giving up way more than they've promised in the past. I really do suspect that the EU and the UK have probably swept in to advise him. I mean, their foreign policy establishments have been leaking against the Trump government already like a sieve. And I suspect that they've, the EU and UK have been so pro-Ukraine that I suspect that they are really, really, sort of hand-holding the Ukrainians through negotiations and helping them. Trump doesn't want to negotiate with the EU over this. He's made it pretty clear that it's not what he wants to do. So I suspect that there's a lot of hand-holding going on there, and it's the Europeans as well trying to get the best deal for the Ukrainians.
What do you think of? I mean, you've been very journalistic here, and you've just told us the facts. But what do you actually think of the proposal from America? Because the way it was covered was that it's a complete balls up. It's just a massive gift for Russia. Trump is owned by Putin. What a joke! Like, he just got excoriated for it. What's your view?
I don't think it's so much owned by Putin. I think it just really points to probably a general laziness and lack of expertise in the administration that we see over and over again. And it's just kind of, we say ad nauseum, Trump wants to be the deal guy. He wants to negotiate with the big boys at the big boy table. He wants to, have his handprints all over this. But it does sort of look like they've just seen, oh, well, this is what Russia says. They've got the upper hand. He very much believes in power, power for power's sake, and just sort of says, okay, well, yeah, you guys do this. And then I think to be honest, I really think it just has the hallmarks of laziness. And then that Trump's tried to say to the Ukrainians, oh, we'll give you something, which is that we'll take half of your minerals. And, we'll get onto that in a moment as well. But yeah, I genuinely think, Trump had came into office saying that he could do this in a day.
53 times. 53 times he said that. 53 times. Yes. I
mean, he put out that that tweet the other week, the Truth Social post saying in all caps, Vladimir, stop.
Yeah.
I think they're getting frustrated. He just wants anything that he can spin into a deal. And yeah, I genuinely, my suspicion is it's just laziness and frustration. What do you think?
Look, I think that people over-egged how bad a deal it was. Like I said, I think if without the Crimea, I think that Ukraine would have been willing to negotiate on a lot of those like as a starting position. I think Ukraine could have come around on a lot of the other details. But the Crimea one was just dumb. I thought it was just really, really dumb. Like, it's just such an obvious concession to force. And I think it's true. Russia did not make any concessions at all. Just none. Like, you got to get at least one concession from Russia. At least one. Because Ukraine were making plenty of concessions under that deal. At least that Trump was trying to force them to make plenty of concessions. And importantly, Ukraine does not have, like, Trump loves talking about cards to play. I'm going to use that metaphor, the cards to play metaphor. Ukraine only really has one card to play in negotiations for peace, and that is its land. It can only give up land once, right? And they have been prepared from the beginning, I think, to give up land in return for security. Like, I reckon, I mean, I might be wrong here, but I reckon Zelensky would actually give up those 4 provinces in return for an ironclad NATO deal that Russia is not ever coming ever again. Because that's the most important thing for them. Like they know Russia is coming again. They know that if there's just a stalemate and America stops the war for a little while, Russia, and especially if they get rid of the sanctions, Russia's going to rearm super fast, now with a much hardened industrial sector like that's designed for war now, and they'll come back with 3 times as much strength in another year or two, or maybe they'll wait till Trump goes, another 3 years or 4 years, and they'll just plow straight through Ukraine, and Ukraine knows that. And so I know they said that last time, but just Russia has such an advantage over Ukraine. And if you just freeze it for 3 or 4 years, allow Russia to rebuild their economy properly and let them have another go, that will help them so much. And so Ukraine will do anything, I think, to have a proper security guarantee. Now, America wasn't prepared to give them that proper security guarantee. As part of this proposal, they could get security guarantees from Europe, which aren't really security guarantees, but that's something, I guess. They couldn't have NATO under this deal. They weren't going to get America. So if you get Ukraine to give up their land in this deal, where they haven't got security, they're giving up their one card in return for not what they need. That's screwing Ukraine over. America was asking Ukraine to screw itself over. And I think that was a mistake. And so I think that they need to force just a couple of concessions from Russia to make it a little bit fairer. One of them, I think America should offer some kind of guarantee. It doesn't have to be like a NATO-style guarantee, but something. And secondly, I think they should have said de facto on Crimea. And I think it would have been a much more likely deal to be agreed to if they'd done those two things, I would say. By the way, quickly. I mean, because the Ukrainian counter proposal actually said that they gave up on the NATO idea. That's one of their big concessions. And they said, I mean, part of their security counter proposal, and then I suppose we can talk about the land, was no restrictions on the size of the Ukrainian military. Yes. Oh.
Which I think is quite big because, a European security guarantee backed by the United States. So I don't know if that means that EU peacekeepers with the US, some sort of agreement that the US would, I don't know, if peacekeepers were attacked, that's a red line or something like that.
I think that's reasonable. I think that's totally reasonable.
Yeah, so they certainly are. And that's why I say I can sort of see the hands of the Europeans all over this now, kind of saying, you guys have got to come to us. And also, Ukraine sort of said that they're giving 2 big concessions, which is that they've dropped the demand to get all of their territory back.
Yeah.
Sorry, my voice is fading. And that they've dropped the insistence that Ukraine joins NATO.
Yeah.
And that's, again, something that I've been saying since we've, for 3-4 years, however long we've been talking about this. The 2 big Russia things were always they're never giving back Crimea and they're never letting Ukraine join NATO.
Yeah.
But and I think the EU would like to avoid it, but the best result for Ukraine, I think, would be allowing them to join the EU. It'd really help get their industry, their economy back on track. I mean, if you look at Hungary has basically been the car manufacturing plant of Europe because it was, it has, so much lower labor costs and things like that. Ukraine could easily become a manufacturing hub for the rest of the EU. I mean, a lot of European powerful countries might not necessarily want that for economic reasons, even though they'll say they will. But to my mind, that would be the best outcome, is saying, if you withdraw the NATO, we'll give you a path to EU membership. But how keen the Europeans are on that, I'm not exactly sure.
My understanding is that America was okay with the EU as well. But you're right, whether the EU's okay. I was just going to say, the only thing I think I was going to add was that I should give Trump his say here. Trump was asked about the fact that there are no concessions for Russia. Why are there no concessions from Russia? And this is his response.
What concessions has Russia offered up thus far to get to the point where you're closer to peace?
Stopping the war, taking the whole country. Pretty big concession.
To my mind, Elle, Russia not doing something that they can't do, which is take over the whole country. I'm sure they would do if they could. Is not much of a concession. Are you impressed by that?
I mean, they already sort of strategically gave that up after they couldn't take Kiev. The second that at the very start of the invasion, or the second round of invasion a few years ago, they had sort of convinced themselves that it was a pissy little country and they were just going to roll straight into Kiev. And when they couldn't do that, I mean, they gave it up fairly quickly, and it would be a nightmare for them to have to govern. Right now, it's just they got Crimea, they got what they want. They still have made it into something of an economic and military rump. They've essentially achieved what they wanted to, and there's no way that they can or will take over the whole country. It's just never going to happen.
Was there anything else about Ukraine's counteroffer that you wanted to say?
I mean, Ukraine is still pushing to take the frozen Russian assets to repay the damage, which, Russia just isn't. I mean, that and probably the security guarantee. Russia's, probably going to draw the line at both of those. But I mean, I think we are starting to see a lot of language come out of Ukraine. I think it was the deputy prime minister said, we're not going to surrender, but we will negotiate. The mayor of Kiev, Vladimir Klitschko, said, Ukraine will probably have to cede some territory. So I think you're seeing there's a lot of, I think, work being done in the background to come to this consensus, which might also just be, as I mentioned before, war's hard. There's fatigue is setting in. People want their lives back. And seeing how they can come to some sort of thing. So the groundwork, I think, is being definitely done in Ukraine to build a consensus in the political class that they are going to have to give up some things. There's only so long you can sit at the negotiation table and bang your fists and say that, this is all, we're not going to give up anything before you actually have to make some concessions.
You were saying that you thought Trump was just being lazy. There are some people who has said that what this is really about is Trump is just trying to get this out of the way to reduce Russia's sanctions. All this is about is he wants to help out his buddy Putin and reduce Russia's sanctions so then America and Russia can do lots of deals and he can go into business with Putin and they can be great buddies together, and that this is just him just trying to get this shit out of the way so he can reduce sanctions. That's all he really cares about. What's your view on that?
I think it's a bit more than that. Just in that, this is something that he'll never back down, as we've already discussed, but he did sort of stake his reputation on this. His whole thing is, I'm the guy who gets deals done. And as he said 53 times, said, I can do this deal in a day. And I mean, we can just see from his Vladimir stop post, in all capitals, that he's frustrated. And he does feel a bit silly right now. I mean, obviously he would love to say, not only did we get a peace deal, now we've got this great new minerals deal with Ukraine and Russia or whatever. I think it's sort of multifaceted, but it does feel, I mean, their initial proposal felt so rushed that they essentially just, photocopied Russia's demands. And I think it is that kind of laziness, but it is a laziness born out of haste, I think, that they just want something to happen. And he's, banging his head against the wall because, I mean, quite frankly, you can tell he just doesn't have a real ability to empathize with the Ukrainian situation. He believes in hard power and the most, dominance and success from the most powerful person, which he clearly sees as Russia and Putin. And so he just doesn't seem to be able to empathize with the Ukrainians and with why they would make particular demands or refuse to accept particular demands.
They've got no cards to play, as he likes to say. Now, am I right in saying that you next would move on to the minerals deal? Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So...
Well, before you do, what I'll do is I just want to show how things changed going into the minerals deal, because you've referred to the Vladimir Stop tweet a few times. I want to give it proper context. Okay, so just before the peace deal, the peace proposal that we were just talking about, there were some big attacks from Russia. And we saw the state of mind that Trump was in going into the peace proposal. This was on Palm Sunday. There was Russia launched a huge attack And people were going to church. 36 people killed, 119 wounded. Condemnations were raining in from everywhere. Well, almost everywhere.
Yes. Do you have a reaction to Russia's Palm Sunday attack on Ukraine?
I think it was terrible, and I was told they made a mistake. But I think it's a horrible thing. I think the whole war is a horrible thing. I think the war is, for that war to have started, is an abuse of power. This country would have never allowed that war to have started if I were president.
Okay, so he was told it was a mistake, that attack, but also the whole thing is Joe Biden's fault. So let's not forget that. But still, he did say it was a horrible thing. So maybe there's a little bit of blame for Putin there, maybe. Just a little bit, maybe. Well, look, he clarified the next day, in case there's any doubt, with this tweet where he wrote, President Zelensky and crooked Joe Biden did an absolutely horrible job in allowing this travesty to begin. Great. So I'm glad we got that cleared up. It was Zelensky's fault that he let Putin invade his country. Zelensky obviously didn't take the hint, and he asked to buy $15 billion in missile defense systems to stop Russia from killing his citizens. Missile defense we're talking about here. And not to be given them, to buy them. And Trump said this.
He's always looking to purchase missiles, you know. He's against, listen, when you start a war, you got to know that you can win the war, right? You don't start a war against somebody that's 20 times your size and then hope that people give you some missiles.
Once again, don't let countries 20 times your size try to take you over. It's very ill-advised. If he doesn't like people trying to buy weaponry, just imagine how much he must hate Israel. Anyway, so it was after all that. It was directly after all that Trump released his proposed peace plan, right? So that was the frame of mind he was in. He was in a very anti-Ukraine frame of mind going into the proposed peace plan we just described. So it's no surprise that proposed peace plan was very pro-Russia because his frame of mind was very anti-Ukraine at that moment. But then, after the proposed peace plan, after it all blew up, he was quite bitter, as I said. He had some bitter tweets, and he seemed to be heading downwards even further. But then there was a massive Russian drone strike directly after, when people were trying to talk about, okay, so here's the peace deal. What can we make of this? Maybe if Russia does this, maybe if Ukraine does that. In the middle of this, there's this massive drone strike. They bombed Kyiv, again going for civilians, not soldiers. They killed 8, wounded 70. That's not how you negotiate peace, right? When Russia goes for Kyiv with drones. And that's when Trump did his famous tweet, I am not happy with the Russian strikes on Kyiv. Not necessary and very bad timing. Vladimir, stop! That, in my view, is a low point for Putin treating Trump like his bitch, basically. It was very little respect being shown by Putin at that moment. Even Chuck Grassley was tweeting at Trump, I've seen enough killing of innocent Ukrainian women plus children. President Trump, please put the toughest of sanctions on Putin. You ought to see from clear evidence he's playing America as a patsy. It was then that the Pope died and Trump met with Zelensky. Putin didn't show up at the funeral. Yep, the chair photo, exactly. Putin wasn't invited to the funeral, I don't think. But Zelensky was, and they met one-on-one in some beautiful hall. And surprise, surprise, directly after Trump actually talked one-on-one with Zelensky, without Putin being there, without J.D. Vance being there, Trump tweets out that day, there was no reason for Putin to be shooting missiles into civilian areas, cities and towns over the last few days. It makes me think that maybe he doesn't want to stop the war. He's just tapping me along and has to be dealt with differently through banking or secondary sanctions. Too many people are dying. And all of a sudden, he's pro-Ukraine again. As soon as he actually talks to Zelensky and like the last guy he talks to, he's positive about. You know, we've seen this before.
Well, so speaking of Russia, I mean, I think I've said this before, but the joke used to be in the last days of Tsar Nikolai II, when his was falling apart because he was quite inept just before the revolution. And the joke in Russia used to be the two most powerful people in Russia are the Tsar and whoever spoke to him last.
That's very good.
And there's always been that sense with Trump, and I mean Zelensky I think was very obviously chastened by that whole humiliation because straight away he said, oh, it's the best talks that we've had. So I think he's learning that unfortunately there is a certain way that you have to play Trump.
Yeah.
And I mean, another thing I wanted to mention as well was that I think just one of the many handicaps that Ukraine has in this whole thing is that Trump forever associates Ukraine with Hunter Biden and his impeachment. And he just can't get past that. It doesn't matter who's in charge, whatever. In his mind, Ukraine is Hunter Biden and impeachment. And he'll just never be able to get over that.
That's a great point. I was just going to add two more things to the context, and then we'll get into the minerals deal. Adding to the pro-Ukraine vibe at this point in time for Trump, Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, released Russia's list of conditions. Remember, America's just offered this peace proposal, which everyone uniformly thinks is as pro-Russian as you can get. And then the drone strike, Russia has the drone strike, and then Lavrov releases Russia's list of conditions for peace. And they are exactly the same as they've been the whole time. They haven't changed at all. Ukraine's permanent neutrality, precluding NATO membership, demilitarization of Ukraine, denazification of Ukraine, international recognition of Russia's annexation of those four provinces in Crimea, the lifting of all sanctions imposed on Russia, the return of its foreign assets, Russia's rejection of any US or Ukrainian control over the nuclear power plant, the repeal of all Ukrainian laws restricting the use of the Russian language, culture, and the Russian Orthodox Church. And so it's just, they haven't bent an inch after all this shit, and Trump wouldn't have liked that either. And then on top of that, Ukraine has been pushing for a 30-day ceasefire this whole time for negotiation. Russia unilaterally announces a 3-day ceasefire to start the week after, for some reason, to commemorate the 80th anniversary of them winning World War II. But you can't have a ceasefire now. You got to wait a week and a half before the ceasefire. Why not just have a week and a half ceasefire? But no, it's got to be a 3-day ceasefire just for their celebrations. And other than that,
because they want the military parade. It's like the biggest day of the year in Russia. It's such a big deal, and they want to have some nice tanks to be able to roll through Moscow for the parade.
Of course. So anyway, all I'm trying to paint here is just we've gone from going into the peace proposal. It couldn't have been worse for Ukraine, but between the peace proposal and the minerals deal, it just does this gradient of more and more pro-Ukraine vibe in Washington. And then we had the minerals deal, which is the best thing that could have happened for Ukraine in regards to America and making America feel good about themselves. So do you want to talk to us about the minerals deal?
Sure. Just very quickly, I will clarify. Earlier when I said Crimea, it's 200 miles from Romania and Turkey, not 25. I just know the Peppers, God bless them, are pedants. And I just want to save your inbox.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, I was wrong.
No, it's good correction, and that's why we love them. Thank you.
Cool. So I think you guys covered the mineral agreement, its first iteration a while ago, and just how it's doesn't really make sense because we don't even know if it necessarily exists, and the infrastructure's not there, and the expense of extracting these minerals, there's no way that it's economically viable for the time being. However, again, Zelensky's clearly worked out that, giving Trump a win, making a deal, all that is necessary to get them to, some sort of promised land. So, and also, just to rebuild that relationship after the dressing down that he received. So the deal establishes a joint investment fund for the reconstruction of Ukraine. So Ukraine would contribute 50% of revenues from the exploitation of new minerals and oil and gas projects. Key to them was leaving out, they've got a couple of really big natural gas projects, I believe, and they're not included, so they don't have to give over funds from them, which is I think which was a big red line for them. And it's much more favourable than to Ukraine than earlier iterations, but obviously it needs it's you can't untether it from the war, because in order for it, to happen, it's going to need peace. It's going to need political stability, and it's going to need a shit ton of investment in infrastructure. There's nothing in Ukraine right now that's going to be able to get these minerals out. You're going to need private and state-led investment, which they're not going to do if there's political instability or war. So this is something that's going to take a very long time, and it is so tied up with peace. So yeah, it's still, there is a deal, but it's there's no deal until there's peace, basically. Any future U.S. military assistance to Ukraine, whether it's ammunition, weapons, training, etc., will be seen as capital contributions to the fund.
Yes.
From the U.S. So I think, which also, I suppose, reading between the lines, sounds like it's a way of the US skirting around, or, making it look to Russia that they're not providing these security guarantees and weapons so much, and that's saying that it's part of a rebuilding fund and putting that capital allocation there. The biggest win for Ukraine was that they're not going to have to use the fund to reimburse Washington for the aid that it's given so far, because I think they were originally asking for $500 billion.
Yes.
That was Trump's original,
yes.
Which obviously, the country's economy, would be hanging on by a thread, but that would essentially, I imagine, that would bankrupt the country for generations. And ensure just more political instability and collapse as well anyway. It also...
I was going to say, they're only counting, you already said this, but just to emphasise, they're only counting the aid as of when the agreement starts. And from when the agreement starts, they're not even counting it as, you need to pay us back. That is considered to be just a capital injection. Any aid given after the deal starts is considered, because America and Ukraine will both be putting money into this investment fund, and they're considering aid to Ukraine as part, military or whatever aid, they're considered part of the investment.
Yeah. So in a gesture of goodwill, once they came to the agreement, Trump immediately allowed a shipment of $50 million in weapons sales. Yes. Again, it's Ukraine is buying here, and I'm sure that's the kind of thing that President Deals is going to make his eyes light up and get him over the line. And it also, what I found kind of interesting was that US gets access to future mineral resources, but at market rates. I kind of thought that there was going to be more of a, there might be some subtext or something, that would be understood, but I sort of thought it was meant to have, that US would have first dibs.
Yeah, look, it seems to me that the US has first rights, but at market rates.
But only at market rates.
Only at market rates. Yeah. So they're not ripping off Ukraine, but they get access first. Like they're the first point of sale, or they can nominate a country for Ukraine to sell to. That's what the deal is.
Oh, okay, right.
In terms of any other goodies that America gets out of this, it's really not much. For 10 years, every single cent made from this deal is going back into more investment. Every single cent. No matter how much America puts in. After 10 years, they're starting to pay just additional revenue after that 10 years. And only for the investments that pay off from this deal. Any money made by the investments as part of this deal after 10 years' time will get paid back to Ukraine and America in proportions that are yet to be determined. So some president in the future is going to decide that. And if America's getting along well with Ukraine, it'll probably be pretty favorable terms, I imagine. But that's all America gets out of it.
Yeah, it is kind of bizarre how much, from Trump's initial proposal, which was just preposterous, to this. But, maybe it just is the idea of having this deal and a gesture of goodwill from both sides. Because, again, as you mentioned, how viable actually getting this stuff out of the ground is a very live question. Yeah. And, to be honest, obviously because of the the geography and the terrain, I mean, and Russia's mineral extraction is much more advanced. And, you know, the US has been already flagging that they do want to, you know, start doing deals with, you know, Trump wants to get a deal done with Russia so that he can, you know, get rid of the sanctions and start economic trade with them again. And to be honest, it almost sounds like Russia would be able to undercut Ukraine through their minerals anyway, just because they're more advanced.
Maybe.
So, you know, how much this is kabuki. I mean, because also, and another, you know, part set in stone in the minerals agreement is that the US won't guarantee Ukrainian security.
Yeah.
So again, this is why it's so tied to that peace deal and why Ukraine is really pushing some sort of what I imagine would be an EU or a pan-European security guarantee. But obviously they want the US to then back that, which is essentially a US security guarantee then. So I imagine that is one of the big sticking points in the overall peace negotiations.
Yeah, the only thing they say in the deal that's even close is they describe it as a long-term strategic alignment, which is pretty far from a security guarantee. So, one thing which I found quite cute in the deal, just share, because I went through the text, of course, because I'm me. There's a
pedant in chief.
There's a little note on tariffs, which I found quite cute. I don't know if you saw it. It explicitly bans Ukraine from levying tariffs on any of the products of the deal. But it only says that America expects not to impose tariffs on Ukraine.
Tariffs for me, but not for thee.
That's right. Which was quite funny. But yeah, it's look, I think is there anything else from the deal that you want to share? I think you nailed it.
I mean, well, also, I guess just on Meet the Press on Sunday morning, Trump, you know, started his threats again that if both sides are going to keep being stupid, with their tremendous hatred, that he would walk away. Yeah. But I mean, that's again, I think just standard him getting frustrated. And Rubio has always come out, you know, he's sort of the Janitor-In-Chief, you know, trying to, you know, and just say, oh, well, it'd just be silly to put a time frame on negotiations. Interestingly, Zelensky said at the weekend that European leaders should not go to the V-Day celebrations on May 9th in Moscow because he said that, we can't guarantee the safety of foreign officials going there because Russia is likely to orchestrate provocations and blame them on Ukraine.
False flag.
Which is, which, I mean, makes sense, but also, you know, it sounds like a veiled threat. And just finally, actually, an interesting stats nugget, if I may.
Yes.
Do I have the power? Do I have the power to call in stings?
You do. Here it comes.
Stats nugget.
I told you once years ago I was driving on a highway in somewhere in the middle of Tennessee, and Stats Nugget. I was listening to this podcast, and Stats Nugget came on, and I thought there was a police officer behind me.
Are you?
So I'm
Tennessee.
There wasn't.
Tennessee?
It was from,
The police?
Yes.
Are you a Abrego Garcia?
Well, I am an immigrant, so, you know. I'm certain that I can't be the only Pepper that's happened to. But yeah, just quickly, so my stats nugget, Institute for the Study of War, you know, a defense think tank, has noted that Russia's really put their meat grinder in full swing. So you mentioned some of the drone attacks on Ukraine over Easter, you know, and civilians that were, you know, very callous and blatant. But they've actually really got their own personal troop meat grinder going. So between September and December last year, Russia had 59 casualties per square kilometre of territory gained. That so far this year, that figure is 99 casualties per square kilometre of territory gained. So they've almost doubled the amount of troops that they're throwing at these gains, which I suppose some people think that they do feel as though negotiations are getting to a point where something may happen, and they're, you know, just trying to grab whatever they can, or at the very least force Ukrainian hands. But that's obviously a pretty significant jump.
It is. Although some of them are probably North Koreans, I imagine, but also, but yeah, no, it is absolutely. That's a good one. I was just going to add a couple of quick things. On the deal, I just remembered there's one thing which we should actually cite, which is when you a question that a lot of people ask is, who is in charge of making the decisions from this investment fund? If America is putting in 50% and Ukraine's putting in 50%, who's actually making the calls? It's Ukraine. The Ukrainian economy minister, Yulia Sviridenko, said all resources on our territory and in territorial waters belong to Ukraine. It is the Ukrainian state that determines what and where to extract. Subsoil remains under Ukrainian ownership. This is clearly established in the agreement. So I just wanted to flag that. Also, the only other thing I'd say about afterwards, when you're talking about sales and all that kind of stuff, is that we should note the Senate has been pretty busy in the last couple of weeks. Lindsey Graham has been getting together a band trying to put together sanctions against Russia. And he's gotten, and he wants to impose sanctions where it's sanctions on Russia and 500% tariffs on goods from countries that buy Russian oil, gas, or uranium. He has over 64 co-sponsors for this bill in the Senate now. So it's filibuster proof, and it's getting real close to veto proof. If Trump tries to veto it. Although if Trump actually did try to veto it, maybe Lindsey Graham might change his mind. The co-sponsors are evenly divided between parties as well, which means there's room for growth amongst the Democrats as well, with even higher numbers. You would think it stands a decent chance of getting through the House with those numbers as well. Would Trump approve? We don't know. But they are building support in Congress for potentially veto-proof numbers on sanctions against Russia if Russia don't pull their finger out. So that may be the story in the Ukraine space in another couple of weeks if Russia continues to screw around. We'll see.
Yeah. I mean, just quickly though, again, this is a bit like the tariffs that I think that there's a lot of people in power in the US that sort of don't want to admit that the very globalized free market economy that they have pushed is, that they can't really put the toothpaste back in the tube on that, and that they don't have as much control as they would like. Again, I think I have mentioned this before, but Russia's still selling oil in the global markets. They send it, via India to be refined. There was something called it sounds like an olive oil. There was like the Lithuanian blend that a lot of Europeans are buying, which is like 51% Lithuanian oil and 49% Russian oil. They had, when the sanctions were genuine, they weren't able to get this stuff done. So, I mean, I'm not sure what the point is. It's just more people clipping the ticket in between and higher global oil prices and things like that, which Republicans don't traditionally like, but this really just does feel like we want to do something, that Lindsey Graham, for all his trying to be a MAGA guy, still has just that Cold War reflex that he just can't help. It's like a twitch. But yeah, I don't really see it as going to do anything particularly meaningful. I mean, the Russian economy is going along pretty well. It's, military Keynesianism. You wind up, it can't go on forever, but they've pumped a lot of money into the domestic economy and they're doing pretty fine.
A note of caution from Elle. Thank you very much. Is there anything else you want to say on this space?
No.
Okay, let's move into immigration. I'm going to rabbit on a little bit here, but jump in whenever you want. I want to talk about that judge who got arrested last week. And I went through it was not an indictment, it's an arrest sheet. And I want to tell you the details because it hasn't been covered as much as I'd like. Okay, so we're talking about Milwaukee County Circuit Judge Hannah Dugan, who was arrested on April 25 with 2 felonies. 1, obstructing or impeding a proceeding before a department or U.S. agency. And 2, concealing an individual to prevent his discovery and arrest. Both charges carry maximum penalties of 5 years in prison. I want to go through the full facts of the case as described by the FBI agent's affidavit. That's all we've got at the moment. So you can believe her, you can not believe her, but yeah, whatever. Let's see. The facts of the case according to the FBI agent. Eduardo Flores Ruiz is an undocumented Mexican immigrant. He appeared at Milwaukee County Courthouse for a pre-trial conference on April 18. He was facing 3 misdemeanor battery counts. Supposedly back in March, he was accused of playing his music too loudly by a roommate And so he punched that roommate 30 times. Bit of an overreaction. That guy ended up in hospital. Woman tried to end the fight. Flores Ruiz allegedly hit her as well. She ended up in hospital. ICE found out about this upcoming appearance through his fingerprints being submitted to a database. They obtained an administrative arrest warrant for Flores Ruiz on April 17. On April 18, court day, 6 members of the Milwaukee ICE task force dressed in plain clothes turned up to the county courthouse to arrest Flores at about 8 a.m. They informed the courtroom deputy they were planning the arrest. The courtroom deputy asked that the agents wait outside the courtroom and arrest Flores Ruiz after the hearing. The agents agreed. They left the courtroom. One of the defense lawyers took photos of them outside while they waited. Flores Ruiz arrives at 8:43 a.m. The victims from Flores Ruiz's criminal case were also in court, waiting to testify. The defense lawyer told Dugan, who was on her bench, that there appeared to be ICE agents in the hallway. Dugan, I'm going to quote the complaint here, Judge Dugan became visibly angry, commented that the situation was absurd, left the bench and entered chambers. Dugan confronted members of the arrest team while visibly upset and had a confrontational, angry demeanour. Deportation Officer A told Dugan that they were there to effectuate an arrest. Dugan asked if the Deportation Officer A had a judicial warrant. Deportation A responded, "No, I have an administrative warrant." Dugan stated that the Deportation Officer A needed a judicial warrant. Just to be clear, time out. A judicial warrant is issued by a federal court based on probable cause. It's a big deal. You can get access to pretty much anything with a judicial warrant. An administrative warrant is issued by an ICE official and is not a big deal. You can't get anything with an administrative warrant. You can't open doors. You can't get permits to search places. Administrative warrant isn't much. Deportation Officer A told Dugan that they were in a public space and had a valid immigration warrant. Dugan asked to see the administrative warrant and Deportation Officer A offered to show it to her. Dugan then demanded that Deportation Officer A speak with the chief judge. We don't know if she saw the warrant or not. In fact, she told all the people who had been photographed to go talk to the chief judge, and they were led off elsewhere to do so. The chief judge was elsewhere. But DEA Agent B had never been photographed, so she never spoke to DEA Agent B. They remained behind and watched what came afterwards. The courtroom deputy said, "As soon as the agent entered the chief judge's vestibule area, I saw Judge Dugan walk south down the hallway and enter a locked door near courtroom 615. I'm familiar with the floor plan for the 6th floor of the courthouse and believe the door Judge Dugan entered led to a non-public hallway from which she could access her courtroom and chambers." We're going to become familiar with that door and hallway soon. DEA Agent B reported that Judge Dugan walked around the hallway and appeared to be looking for additional agents before she returned to her courtroom. That's what DEA Agent B says. Deportation Officer A ended up having a phone conversation with the chief judge, who said he was working on a policy which would dictate locations within the courthouse where ICE could safely conduct enforcement actions. The chief judge emphasized that such actions should not take place in courtrooms or other private locations within the building. Deportation Officer A asks about whether enforcement actions can take place in the hallway, which is where they are. The chief judge indicates hallways are public areas, so yes. Meanwhile, the courtroom deputy approached the remaining arrest team members and stated that they were not the one, and the courtroom deputy was not the one who had notified Judge Dugan about their arrest plans. The courtroom deputy also made a comment about Judge Dugan pushing Flores Ruiz's case through, which the arrest team interpreted to mean that Judge Dugan was attempting to expedite Flores Ruiz's hearing. It turned out she actually adjourned it. Back to inside the courtroom. Judge Dugan has adjourned the proceedings without even alerting the victims and their attorney. She didn't even tell them. She's adjourned and was on her way. As Flores Ruiz walked towards the public courtroom exit, the courtroom deputy saw Dugan get up and heard Dugan say something like, "Wait, come with me." She then escorted Flores Ruiz and his counsel out of the courtroom through the jury door, which leads to a non-public area of the courthouse that we heard about before. According to the courtroom deputy, only deputies, juries, court staff, and in-custody defendants being escorted by deputies use that back jury door. Defense attorneys and defendants who are not in custody never use the jury door. Attorney B backed up all these observations. Attorney B said they saw Judge Dugan forcefully motioned for Flores Ruiz's attorney, and Flores Ruiz to approach. Flores Ruiz's attorney appeared to be confused by the judge's gesture, but complied with her directive. Dugan commanded Flores Ruiz's attorney and the male to leave through a back door of the courtroom. Attorney B then saw Dugan escort Flores Ruiz's attorney and the male through a non-public door near the courtroom's jury box. Shortly after, Dugan came back to the courtroom and conducted hearings on the rest of that morning's docket. She had other hearings. Now, this non-public door appeared to lead to a very public hallway, the hallway that the agents were in. Because then DEA Agent A reports that Flores Ruiz and his attorney were in the public hallway. DEA Agent B also observed Flores Ruiz and his attorney in the hallway near courtroom 615, the door we described before, and noted that Flores Ruiz was looking around the hallway. From different vantage points, both agents observed Flores Ruiz and his counsel walking briskly towards the elevator bank on the south end of the 6th floor. These were not the closest elevators to courtroom 615. DEA Agent A followed Flores Ruiz and his attorney towards the south elevator bank. At approximately 8:50 a.m., DEA Agent A alerted other members of the arrest team that DEA Agent A was on the elevator with Flores Ruiz. So to be clear, from beginning to end, this was 7 minutes long in duration. From the very beginning, from Flores Ruiz entering to when Flores Ruiz leaves. So Dugan adjourned that trial mighty fast. FBI Agent B and DEA Agent A approached Flores Ruiz at the front of the courthouse, identified themselves as law enforcement. Flores Ruiz turned around and sprinted down the street. They chased after him. They chased him for the entire length of the courthouse, ultimately apprehended him near the intersection outside the courthouse. Flores Ruiz was handcuffed and detained, later charged with illegal re-entry into the United States, and Dugan was suspended by the Wisconsin State Supreme Court because they felt it would be in the public interest for Dugan to be temporarily relieved of her duties while she defended these charges. Okay, these facts I just told you were verified by all the law enforcement people, and seemingly the courtroom deputy and a few of the attorneys. It doesn't seem to include Judge Dugan's testimony, though, or Flores Ruiz's testimony, or his lawyer's testimony. And they are possibly the three most important perspectives for this case. And we haven't heard what any of them have to say. For example, we already know that Dugan has written that a warrant was not presented in the hallway on the 6th floor. What does she mean by that? We don't know. It could point to her contesting some of those facts about the warrant. Maybe it doesn't. I don't know. Also, this was a criminal complaint. I need to explain that. A criminal complaint is not an indictment. An indictment goes through a grand jury, and a grand jury will determine whether probable cause supports the alleged criminal conduct. A criminal complaint is just no grand jury. You just make the complaint immediately and arrest them without any grand jury. That's a strange path to pursue, because you only normally do that when there's a serious risk to the public at large that the defendant may reoffend and it might be dangerous, which is obviously not the case with a judge. But you don't do it normally because it starts the clock before you have to release them if you don't have a full case. But they've done a criminal complaint, which is very strange. And it also means that they jumped the gun. They didn't do all their evidence. They haven't done all their sniffing around. It's all based on one affidavit, which provides only one side of the story. But having said this, that this arrest warrant still needs to be issued by a neutral magistrate. So some magistrate did sign off on this arrest warrant. And determined that the FBI's agent's affidavit and they independently determined that the probable cause existed. So There's some check and balance. Anyway, so that's all the facts. Before I get into the law, that's all the facts. That's according to the FBI agent. That's all the information. Do you have any thoughts so far about whether you think Judge Dugan is going to face the music or not?
No, I'm happy for you to roll on.
Okay, all right. Let me go through the two charges, but to flesh this out a little bit. First charge, Section 1505, obstruction of a proceeding. This is a felony. What it requires is, number one, existence of an investigative proceeding. There is or was an ongoing proceeding, inquiry, or investigation before a federal department, agency, or any committee of Congress. Right away, we got a problem with that, because is immigration removal an investigative proceeding? I don't know. There is no precedent here. So that's the first problem. Court's going to have to determine that. Remember, the Supreme Court just let the January 6 defendants off this exact charge on the grounds that this proceeding was too broadly applied as a designation. So this might have the same problems. Second item, the defendant was aware of the pending proceeding. Did she think that they had their proposed... Did she think that their proposed arrest wasn't legitimate because they didn't have a judicial warrant? If she didn't think it was legitimate, she gets off because she has to be aware of a pending proceeding. Thirdly, there has to be an obstructive action. You engaged in one or more of the obstructive actions outlined in the statute, such as withholding or falsifying documents or using threats of force. Here's the next problem. There are two parts to this element. You're either messing with documents or using threats of force. I'm not sure what Dugan did matches either arm of that element. So she might not tick off that one either. Finally, you need corrupt intent. You did so with corrupt intent, meaning the actions were taken with a wrongful purpose to disrupt, impede, or influence the proceeding. Corrupt intent refers to a deliberate and dishonest motive to interfere with the investigation or proceeding rather than a legitimate or lawful purpose. Maybe? I mean, it sounds like there's something dodgy happening here. It's possible she thought all the feds were talking to the chief judge down the hall, so they wouldn't... So she might have sent them off there on purpose, so then she could sneak him out while they were away. That's possible. DEA Agent B was watching the whole time, but she didn't know that. So it's possible that was evidence of corrupt intent. That's what Kash Patel thinks. He said, "We believe Judge Dugan intentionally misdirected federal agents away from the subject to be arrested in her courthouse, allowing the subject to evade arrest." But if that's the case, why did she get them to go out in a private exit? If they're not there, they can go out the public exit. So why did she send them out the private exit if she thought they weren't there and so they didn't require sneaking out? And can we prove what her thought process is? Because that's another tough thing there. What was she thinking? Because it's about intent here, right? And even if Patel's wrong, why did Dugan send them through the private exit? The fact she sent them through a private exit is suspicious on its own. So that might be indicative of corrupt intent. Maybe. That's what they have to prove. Her adjourning the proceedings immediately without even telling the victims, that seems a bit dodgy as well. But on the other hand, that private exit led to a very public hallway. What was she thinking there? If she has a good answer to that question, why she sent them out the private exit, that completely destroys any chance of sticking these charges. I'll just say that right now. Unless, did that private exit potentially also lead to somewhere other than the public hallway and they stuffed up? I don't know. I don't know the layout of that private hallway. We don't know from the affidavit. If there's only one exit though, and it's public, it doesn't seem like there's much concealing going on, I have to say. I don't know. Anyway, but that's my take on the first charge. Essentially, I don't think it's going to stick for all kinds of reasons. The second charge was Section 1071, concealing person from arrest. That's a misdemeanor. First element, a federal warrant had been issued for the person's arrest. Does an administrative warrant count? I assume it does, but maybe it doesn't. I don't know. 2, the person concealing them knew that a warrant had been issued. Does Dugan think the administrative warrant counts? She sure acted like she didn't think so. Also, remember Dugan said they showed no warrant. Is someone lying here? I don't know. 3, the person actually concealed the fugitive from law enforcement. This is the same as before. The private hallway, public hallway thing, all the same questions apply here. We don't know. But if she set them out where she knew was going to be a public hallway, I think it's hard to say she concealed them. Finally, the person acted with intent to prevent fugitive's discovery or arrest. Same questions as before. That's corrupt intent again. Why'd she adjourn so quickly? All the same questions. All right. Personally, I think from what I've read, these charges are unlikely to stick, but you make up your own mind on that. There is another element. Do you want to say anything at this point in time?
Just finish up and then I can give you my thoughts.
Okay. There is one other element to this that's important. There is a precedent here. And the precedent is an interesting point of contrast. Massachusetts State Judge Shelley Joseph was indicted along with her deputy in Trump's first term for allegedly helping a defendant escape an ICE arrest outside her courtroom. Same scenario. But in this case, there was no public hallway. She literally hid him. And then she led him out the back of the courthouse via a holding cell. She also allegedly turned off the courtroom recording for 53 seconds, during which the defense attorney asked her for help, and her deputy allegedly, and then she turned it back on when she took them out the courtroom, and her deputy allegedly lied to the grand jury. This is all excellent evidence of corrupt intent, right? Unlike what we got here, that's real corrupt intent, what I've just described. Also in this case, the migrant escaped for 2 weeks before he was apprehended. They didn't watch him walking out of the courtroom through a different door, sure. What happened in the end to her? In 2022, the Biden DOJ dropped the charges against her. Maybe they were more sympathetic than the Trump DOJ, but also at the time it seemed like they were pretty concerned about how much the Trump DOJ had seemed to turn the entire case into a PR circus. If that was a concern, then this case is so much worse because there are some key differences. Number one, the DOJ elected to make this arrest a circus, right? The last time they had way more evidence against the judge, but they shut up for a year. They let her turn herself in after a year. This time they arrested her at the courthouse and they put her in handcuffs in front of the press, creating a huge media ruckus. So there was much more of a PR circus this time round from DOJ. And then the FBI chief released this photo here publicly with the caption, "No one is above the law," which, by the way, is a blatant violation of DOJ guidelines that state DOJ personnel should not encourage or assist news media in photographing or televising a person held in custody. DOJ personnel should not voluntarily disclose a photograph or a defendant unless it serves a law enforcement function or unless the photograph is already part of the public record. In this case, Pam Bondi then, the head of the DOJ, that very night went on to Fox News to say this.
She goes out in the hallway, screams at the immigration officers. She's furious, visibly shaken, upset, sends them off to talk to the chief judge. She comes back in the courtroom. You're not going to believe this. Takes the defendant and the defense attorney back in her chambers, takes them out a private exit and tells them to leave. While a state prosecutor and victims of domestic violence are sitting in the courtroom.
Wow. You know, Madam Attorney General, great to have you.
Shame on her. It was a domestic violence case of all cases, and she's protecting a criminal defendant over victims of crime.
When the American public hears this and they think these were once upstanding people in their communities and their professions, and they put it all on the line for this, I mean, have you dug into their motive? Like, what inspired them to carry out these acts and harbor criminals?
They're deranged is all I can think of. I cannot believe. I think some of these judges think they are beyond and above the law, and they are not. And we're sending a very strong message today. If you are harboring a fugitive, we don't care who you are. If you are helping hide one, if you are giving a TDA member guns, anyone who is illegally in this country, we will come after you and we will prosecute you. We will find you.
Maybe that's just a little bit prejudicial. Maybe just a little bit.
Just a little bit. Go on.
Yeah, and so obviously they're intent on creating publicity here. More intent on creating publicity and dispensing justice. But also, remember, the first case, the precedent, they spent a year investigating it before they actually arrested the person. This time they spent 6 days, and they didn't even talk to the judge or the defendant or the defense lawyer. They were sloppy as all hell. They didn't run it through a grand jury. They've really cut some corners here. So when you compare the two, this one looks so much worse than the last one. And the last one they got off anyway. So I feel like from my point of view, they've got their publicity that they want, and these charges are going to go away. That's what I think is going to happen.
Absolutely. What I suppose I wanted to say was that I think it just really goes to highlight just the whole ethos behind these deportations and this whole anti-immigration agenda from the administration is that it is extrajudicial. And when the judiciary kind of gets involved as well, the process is the punishment, is having to go through all of this. But when we see, I think it is really serving to highlight, and not necessarily that it's been orchestrated by Kash Patel or Stephen Miller or whoever, but that this culture is there, is that ICE and Border Protection sort of have this impunity with which they can operate, and then details and due process and precedent is sort of worked out later on, and that is it is intended to scare people. We've already seen that the entire US food supply chain runs on undocumented labor. There already, from very early on, Trump is already starting to walk back. When a Republican congressman who, the big employer in town is the local meat works, comes and knocks on his door and says, you can't deport this, our whole city collapses. That Trump's already been doing, essentially deals or making sure that ICE isn't, walking into those food processing plants and mass arresting people. So I think it is really shown now to be designed to be chaotic and ad hoc, and to target bluer states and bluer districts and things like that. And that is all part of the whole idea, because they actually don't necessarily, I mean, probably Stephen Miller does, but they know that the country can't affect the mass deportations in the way that they are. So it is meant to be this chaotic, this highly publicized, to keep the base happy, to say, look at what we're doing. I mean, we are arresting, Biden, or blue Democrat judges who aren't upholding, what we're saying. It is like, the border wall that was never built, that I guarantee you that 95% of rusted on MAGA people think that there is a giant metal fence that goes all the way along the US border with Mexico. And this is the same thing. It is the security theater to make people think that this is happening, because in reality it can't. It is very obviously happening to some people, but in a very ad hoc, random way, because they can't affect what they're promising to do, because the whole country's economy will collapse.
I think that's a good call. And like I've said many times, the number of deportations are the same as Biden. They hate that stat, but it's true.
Yeah.
I think you're absolutely right. By the way, just for record, I was so head up with my legal thing and going through facts and all that kind of stuff. I never actually said my opinion, which is
go for it.
Which is. I mean, I'll tell you what I thought about the charges, but I have no problems with them arresting a judge for obstruction if the judge obstructed. I think that there's a whole bunch of when the judge got arrested, there are a whole bunch of tweets from Democrats going, oh, authoritarianism gone wild. And, Tina Smith tweeting out, understand what this is. If Kash Patel and Donald Trump don't like a judge, they think they can arrest them. This is stunning. We must stand up to this blatant power grab. Elizabeth Warren, first, Trump ignored the Supreme Court. Now his FBI arrested the judge. This administration is threatening our country's judicial system. This rings serious alarm bells. I could read you out 10 of these. Like they're all ringing the sirens and alarm bells. If she actually committed obstruction, I don't have a problem with that. I happen to believe in no one is above the law. I meant it for Trump. I mean it for some Wisconsin judge. If you break the law, you should get arrested, even if it's an unjust law. Like people go, well, if it's an unjust law, I don't care. I'm a rule of law guy, right? That's fine. I don't have a problem with that. Like you can, so I actually don't think it's authoritarianism run wild for them arresting a judge, but I do think their case is sloppy as all hell, and then you got a problem. If your case is sloppy as all hell and you're rushing out to arrest a judge without even doing the proper investigation, then you've got a problem. And that's what I object to. So I'm objecting to the fact that I think the DOJ is a fly-by-night operation that is cutting corners everywhere and doesn't give a shit about the rule of law, and that is what bothers me. It's not that they're arresting judges. Look, there's a case right now you might not be aware of. In fact, it was the same day they arrested another judge for obstruction, and you haven't heard much about this one. And the reason why is because this case is very different. It's a case in Colorado, and I'm not going to spend hours on this. I'll just flag just that it exists. Is a case in Colorado where the judge and his wife have both been arrested. Judge Kano, actually it was New Mexico. Sorry, my fault. New Mexico. They had an alleged member of Tren de Aragua living at their place. He went out shooting with their daughter and stuff. There was lots of photos apparently of him posing with their guns, right? This supposed gang member. And the wife then allegedly told the guy to delete his Facebook account where he had posted photos with weapons owned by the judge, his wife, and daughter. And the father destroyed the guy's mobile phone with a hammer and then dropped pieces of it in the tip to try and hide the evidence of the fact that this guy was staying at their place, and like when he found out they was being investigated, right, when the heat was on him. He literally destroyed the guy's phone to hide the evidence. Now that is obstruction, okay? And I got no problems with those people being arrested. I don't know what was going on with them, but look, I need to see the proper facts and all the rest of it. But on the surface, that looks a lot more convincing to me than this one, right? So if you find a convincing case, then great. But this case, I think, looks very sloppy and oh so typical of what we've seen from DOJ in the last couple of months. That's my take.
Yeah, agreed. I mean, I think it's very sweet that you still are trying to run with the assumption that rule of law is operating in the United States at the moment. But God bless you. So someone has to uphold it, and if it's a dude with a TV show 10,000 miles away, so be it. Okay, I want to talk to you about and ask you about two cases of state politics now. Okay, cool. I might have to wrap up soon.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's just do these.
If that's all right. Sorry. We'll be going 3 hours.
Yeah. We'll just do these. These will be quite quick, and then we can wrap up. All right, because they're both nearby to you. One's in Oklahoma. One's in Alabama. All right, Oklahoma. Correspondent Laura asks, "Can Dave? Sorry, Dave's not here today. Please talk about the new curriculum at schools in Oklahoma next week." Apparently, they'll be teaching Trump's big lie to students in the future, not as a lesson about propaganda or conspiracy theories, but as factual lessons. Indeed, that is true. Have you heard about this story?
Yes, I have.
Okay.
This has been coming. Yeah. What do they say? They call it Bible, not Biden.
There we go. That's a sure sign that it's very neutral down the middle.
Yeah. You explain. I've got some context I can add afterwards.
Fantastic. Okay. Beginning in the 2025-26 school year, the new social studies curriculum this is for thousands of students in Oklahoma. It will indeed feature Trump's claims of 2020 election fraud. You might think that's a great idea, teaching them about conspiracy theories, critical thinking. No, they're not doing that. They're not doing that. They're going to be asked to, quote, analyze contemporary turning points of 21st century American society. So Trump's election fraud claims are not going to be a text to analyze. They're going to be a text to memorize. Okay, so what it involves is the new version of the standards says high school students should, quote, identify discrepancies in 2020 election results by looking at graphs and other information, including the sudden halting of ballot counting in select cities in key battleground states, the security risks of mail-in balloting, sudden batch dumps, an unforeseen record number of voters, and the unprecedented contradiction of bellwether county trends. When this first became controversial in March, Walters, who was the superintendent, the education superintendent, said that the purpose of this was to teach students to think for themselves and to not be spoon-fed left-wing propaganda. Sounds like he very much supports people coming to different conclusions than he has. But then we get to the Biden section you were referring to. Originally, the students last year, they learned about the challenges and accomplishments of Biden's term. Walters took out the accomplishments bit. So originally it said that the students should be able to describe economic recovery after the COVID-19 pandemic and bipartisan infrastructure legislation. But now it only asks students to describe the United States-Mexico border crisis and America's withdrawal from Afghanistan, responses to the Russian invasion of Ukraine and the Gaza-Israel conflict. Also, it will increase the number of mentions of the Bible from 2 to nearly 50 for students starting in first grade, mostly about the influence of Christian values on the Constitution and the Founding Fathers, undoubtedly all accurate. Like I said, the Superintendent of Public Instruction, his name's Ryan Walters, this Walters guy, he said his changes were based on public input, but he has provided no evidence of any of this public input. A reporter who reviewed an open records request said there were no public comments in the open records, and Walters responded by saying that there were focus groups and a lot of discussions that were going on. Ultimately, he said, though, it was up to me to make the final decisions of what we're going to put in. But that's not true. It wasn't just him. He had an executive review committee as well. Not your usual executive review committee. Nope. Normally an executive review committee would have educators on it if it's for a syllabus. This one has
people who lived in the state even.
3 of the 10 on the committee have ever lived in Oklahoma. But it does have Kevin Roberts, the president of the Heritage Foundation, Dennis Prager, the co-founder of right-wing website PragerU, and Republican talkback host Steve Deese, and right-wing pseudo-historian David Barton. It could be worse. That same Walters guy put libs of TikTok on his library advisory committee, so it could be worse. But anyway, how was this allowed, you might ask? It was approved by the Oklahoma State Board of Education. And they're not David Barton and libs of TikTok. They're a normal board. So what happened? Well, Walters did not send them the new standards with his additions until 4 p.m. the day before the board's 9:30 a.m. meeting. And the new standards were 400 pages long. And there was only a very subtle indication that the new standards had changed at all from the old standards. Certainly didn't have any pointers to what those changes would be. One of the board members asked Walters to provide documents that noted the changes made. Walters called it irrelevant. As it turned out, they didn't even need to vote that day. This was in February. They had till April. But when the board members asked to delay the vote, Walters said they had a legislative time crunch and the vote had to be taken that day. The Oklahoma Council for Social Studies isn't a big fan of these changes. I won't read you their quote, but take it from me, they don't like it. They say the manner in which these changes were introduced raises serious concerns, casting doubt on the transparency and integrity of the standards development process. What wowzers, Elle? What do you have to add to all this?
Yeah, so David Barton's been on my radar for a long time. I've written a bit about him. So he's a really interesting figure in the charismatic Pentecostal world that Dave and I talk about a lot. So I think he actually grew up in Oklahoma, but he was the vice chair of the Texas Republican Party for a long time in the 90s and early 2000s. And since then, as you mentioned, he's been really influential in the education and pseudo history movement with his wall builders movement. And so he brings together, all kind of, he's very not a huge fan of separation of church and state. Brings together all sorts of groups of people and, putting together these kind of school curriculums, in having this kind of junk press that just like churns out books and all sorts of stuff. So when they always say, oh, they should teach this. Oh, look, we've already got, here's something we prepared earlier. He's also really, really significant influence on Speaker Mike Johnson. Oh, yeah. He's always been very well connected. But in 2016, he was originally a Ted Cruz guy, probably owing as much to his Texas affiliation as anything. But he is an extremely influential figure, along with Lance Wallnau. He was, one of the people who certainly had connections to January 6th, just in kind of really pumping people up, inciting people that were involved in January 6th. I think some people that had, been through some of his training were involved in January 6th. Teddy Wilson, if people are ever interested, he's a really good independent journalist, has put together this like fantastic map online of connecting all the January 6 people and their influences. Which is always, very, very useful thing to look up. So I just want to shout out David Barton because he is one of those kind of slightly under the radar people that I've been following for a long time. I think it's really interesting as well that this is happening in Oklahoma. This education war has been going on in Oklahoma for a lot longer than, just the new, just this recent plan. And I really think it is just as simple as Oklahoma is blood red state. It's never, even if they said, right, we're ending school tomorrow and all the kids are going to go to forced labor, people would still vote Republican. And so it is this very safe testing ground. There's obviously, it is still Bible Belt. It is still, fairly white, older, just traditional Republican voters anyway. But it's really starting to look like it is the place where they are trying out these education reforms, much in the way that the Wisconsin State Supreme Court was where they tried out a lot of the ideas that were eventually, have been used by the Heritage Foundation and the Federalist Society in changing other courts and the Supreme Court. So there is this very concerted, well-organized, well-funded right-wing, movement that has a lot of allegiances with religious conservatives and political conservatives. I've seen some videos that have come out from some of these groups that I'm not allowed to share publicly, unfortunately, but of just how organized and orchestrated these kind of movements are, and that they are generally done as a testing ground before they'll push out the legislation, and try to run this in, they'll probably just push it across more red states as well. But certainly, this is very calculated and organized, and it can often look like, that there's just a few cowboys in charge, or that some, crazy guy has gotten an idea. But it is, this is all part of a, greater organization. And, we're about to see it in my state of Louisiana. Our new governor is pushing the 10 Commandments in classrooms, which will have to go to the Supreme Court straight away. We're actually coming up to the 100th anniversary of Scope's monkey trial. So I think there's going to be a bit of chatter about it, and it might be a bit of a birthday present for someone. There's a reason why this is all coming from the red states, and it's not just because these guys are with the program. It's because it's where it can be the testing ground, and like we were talking earlier, with the bayonet, you keep prodding.
Sometimes when it's a one-party state, like especially when it's a one-party red state, you get the development of factions within the Republican Party, so that what would have previously been Democrats, moderate Democrats, are actually just moderate Republicans. Like in Texas, you get that. You get a moderate Republican faction that is essentially Democrats, but just called Republicans, and a extreme conservative faction fighting each other, and the Democrats are irrelevant. You don't get that kind of thing in Oklahoma?
I don't know that much about Oklahoma personally. So, I mean, there probably would be. But I know in Oklahoma there has always been a fairly small group of elites that have sort of operated the state, just because, it's a small place. Look, I'm sure that there is. And often these differences can be personality-led rather than factional, more than anything. And I think certainly one thing in the MAGA ecosystem that it really promotes is every man for himself. Build up your personal brand before someone tears you down. But yeah, just the fact that so many of these people are well-known education activists. Your Prager, Kevin Roberts from Heritage Foundation, David Barton. It just shows, it's part of a grander coordinated movement. And, I'm sure that there's plenty of funds going into people's re-election campaigns and all sorts of things for getting on board with this. I don't think that there's going to be some I don't know, libertarian faction or something within the party that says, we can't be having this.
Sure.
I think it all sounds fairly stitched up to my mind.
Fair enough. Okay, and if you have the time, can we do the Alabama one as well, or are you out of here?
Yeah.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, we'll do Alabama quickly.
Okay, good. It will be quick. Okay, so Lowndes County has got a bit of a problem. In particular, what they call the Black Belt, which is, even though 72% of the region is black, it's called the Black Belt because of the soil. The soil is black.
Soil, yeah.
It's, it was originally ideal for cotton farming, but not much else. 1/3 of residents live below the poverty line as well in this region. In 2023, a DOJ investigation found that the county's low-income residents, mostly black, have not had basic sanitation for generations. Human wastewater is piped into ditches and sewerage is left to collect in yards, open areas, woods. When it rains, the waste floods homes, fields, and drinking water. It backs up in sinks and homes frequently. This has been happening for decades. A 2017 study found that 1/3 of the county's adults suffered from hookworm, which is a parasite that is supposed to not exist in America anymore, but it exists in Lowndes County. You get hookworm from walking barefoot on soil contaminated with infected feces. You might be asking, why hasn't this been fixed? The DOJ investigation found the Alabama Department of Health have done nothing. The Alabama Department of Health told NBC just now that the installation of sanitation systems and related infrastructure is outside the authority or responsibilities. Biden was big on what they call environmental justice, and they described this as an example of environmental racism. And so Biden stepped in with a $26 million program to try and fix it. So far, $1.5 million has been dispensed to build 3 septic tanks. That's what's happened so far. The Trump administration just stopped the funding dead. You might be wondering, by the way, why the residents haven't fixed this themselves. We mentioned the black soil before. When it's dry, it's extremely hard. When it moves from wet to dry, it can shift a lot, and it basically destroys man-made structures like pipes. If you're an amateur pipe layer, you're in trouble. You need a professional to deal with it. These people cannot afford a professional, so that's why the administration had to step in. All right. Now we've got an executive order on January 20, which explains why the current administration cancelled it. The Ending Radical and Wasteful Government DEI Programs and Preferencing Executive Order ordered the deputy agency or department head to, quote, assess the operational impact and cost of the prior administration's DEI, DEIA and environmental justice programs and policies. They obviously decided this was an environmental justice program, so it should be ended. The Trump administration calls this program illegal DEI. The DOJ Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights, Harmeet Dillon, said the DOJ will no longer push environmental justice as viewed through a distorting DEI lens. The press release said, today's closure is another step this administration has taken to eradicate illegal DEI preferences and environmental justice across the government and in the private sector. The Democratic in Alabama, Terry Sewell, said, this agreement had nothing to do with DEI. It was about addressing a public health crisis that has forced generations of children and families to endure the health hazards of living in proximity to raw sewage. As the DOJ itself documented, by terminating it, the Trump administration has put its blatant disregard for the health of my constituents on full display. And that is true. But presumably they reacted to the phrase environmental justice being used to justify it, which is extremely frustrating. Now, I have an extra thought about this, but I'd like you to jump in at this point in time, because that's the basic story.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose just to add a bit more historical context.
Yeah.
So Montgomery was obviously the Confederate capital in the Civil War.
Yes.
And this land is, Lowndes County is just outside of Montgomery. And even back then they knew the land was not really usable. So, I mean, I think it was like a year after the Civil War, you know, these freed black slaves, they sort of said, oh, hey, you know, you can have all this land to yourself, you know, just if you just get away from our beautiful antebellum homes. And so the families there are descendants of, you know, the most, I mean, all slaves are disenfranchised by definition, but, you know, the people who are only able to go that far to be on this unusable land, you know, it's like you said, explained about the soil, it's above chalk, there's not reliable source of water. So this is just, you know, almost 200 years of just generational upon generational upon generational poverty. And so there is, I think there's just that added layer of meaning when they say, you know, about this DEI stuff, that it is, you know, it is genuinely is an environmental justice issue, as so many places in the South, obviously, where I live are. I mean, in parts of Louisiana that are very, very black and impoverished, you know, there's Cancer Alley, where all of the worst chemical polluters just spill out their cancers, and, you know, the mortality rate for things like child leukemia is through the roof. So this stuff has been happening for a long time. I suppose my only other real thought, just because it's, you know, as we've seen with all this Doge stuff, and I mean, I was talking to a friend down here who works in not-for-profit for an African-American kind of leadership academy. And she said, oh, you know, thank God we got all of our funding just before the election. So we've got our funding sorted out for the next 3 years, because she said we're dead after that. You know, all of our stuff has all of the key words. So I think it's really interesting, because I already know that people in government and these kind of not-for-profit sectors are already working on ways that they can circumvent this language, because it is just so abundantly clear that a lot of these cuts have been done by Control F. You know, for example, when all of the Enola Gay stuff was taken off the military website. So the plane that drops the bomb in Hiroshima, because they were very clearly just Control F gay, homosexual, DEI. So I think it is going to be, I mean, the phrase Orwellian language is kind of cliched and overused now, but I think there is kind of a weird kind of little arms race going on the side to work out the most circumventable language. So as much as anything, you just don't wind up on some Elon Musk shit list. And in future that, you know, there will be people trying to get these programs going, because, you know, the world's richest country needs basic sanitation for its people. But yeah, you know, environmental justice is very obviously one of those words that we're not allowed to use anymore.
Yeah. I was just going to add to what you were saying before about the history, that I mean, I totally, what you said about the Southern Homestead Act, about them given this free land, which is useless. I mean, especially given the plantation system broke down at exactly that point in time. So it just became useless immediately, this land. So it's very poor. But on top of that, not only are they trapped in a self-reinforcing cycle of poverty, but obviously they're largely ignored, these communities, by the racist states they're in, especially 150 years ago, 200 years ago. Like it's not like Alabama was helping them out much in the late 1800s and early 1900s, this 72% black county. So that just made it worse. Then they tried to politically organise in the middle of the 20th century Like during the civil rights era, they tried to politically organize. They were inspired. The Selma March went straight through Lowndes County. I was
going to say it's Selma territory.
Absolutely.
Yeah, for sure.
And what happened then was they obviously couldn't outvote the rest of the state, and so they didn't win. And they had a reputation then of being, inverted commas, troublemakers, which made the state want to help them even less. And so you had the situation where basically this region was just ignored more and more and more. You might go, why don't they move out? Some people do move out, but the poorer you are, the harder it is to move out. Well, you're going to take your you're going to take your grandma with you and your kids, and it becomes very hard if you have no money and no resources. And this is a very, very poor area. So it's just this self-reinforcing cycle of poverty over and over again. And the sewage doesn't help. It really doesn't help as far as this cycle of poverty, which actually, ironically, this example is the perfect example of why DEI is a thing. There is structural racism. It exists. There are horror stories. Yes, I know. Conservatives can point to examples. They go, oh, here is a black person who's taking advantage of the fact they're black to get a handout, which they don't deserve. Yeah, they exist. I'm not saying they don't exist. But importantly, people who are screwed because of structural racism exist in a big way, especially in the South. And you can't ignore it. And this is a classic example of exactly that. So I get why conservatives cringe when they hear phrases like environmental racism and environmental justice, but that's just jargon. Call it something else, but look past the language and look at the problem. There is shit coming out of people's sinks. That is the problem. I don't care what you call it. There is shit coming out of their sink. A third of them have hookworm. Call it hookworm if you like. But the fact is, here's a problem. And this entire community has been screwed for nearly 200 years because of it. So, yeah, it's a very depressing situation. That's all I had to add.
Yeah, 100% agree. It's disgraceful, but
anyway,
here we are.
On that wonderful note, Elle, thank you so much for your time. As always,
thank you. Your energy has exceeded that of my AirPods. The battery just started going in my ears. So there you go. You're stronger than Tim Apple.
Yeah, take that, Tim Apple. Anyway, thank you so much for your time as always, and I'm looking forward to the next time. And till then, stay peppy, Elle. Oh, what?
Pleasure's on mine.
What's your podcast? Say it again.
If anyone, for the two people that have made it this far, Hell to Pay.
Hell to Pay. All right. We're all going there afterwards. Thank you very much. Stay peppy, Elle.
Thank you.
It's been a while since we heard this thing. Yeah, Chaz Unleashed is back. Okay, I'm not going to do it for long. It's just a few things I wanted to get into this app that we didn't get time for. And I've got notes right in front of me. I want to start a clean slate with Dave. So 15, 20 minutes. Let's see how we go. It's about 3:10 in this episode. So it'll be about 3.5 hours. That's not too bad. Let's see how we go. Okay. So I just wanted to talk about some horror stories from immigration. People like when I do the horror stories because they're not so well covered out in the in general media world. A couple of quick ones. A guy called Carlos Uzcategui Vilma. The Wall Street Journal wrote about him. I don't think anyone else did. They found no criminal record or ties to any gang. He traveled to the U.S. via Colombia. He was an economic migrant. In Mexico City, he applied for an appointment with the U.S. Border Patrol via the app that you're meant to use when you under the Biden administration. He used the app. He waited for nearly 9 months until he was given an appointment. He used it every day, trying to get an appointment for 9 months. Then he entered the US legally on the date of his appointment, at which point he was immediately detained because of his tattoos and then sent to El Salvador 3 months later. Once again, note The tattoos was ICE, not Trump. That was when Biden was around. So ICE have been doing this tattoo thing for a while. Another horror story, another quickie. ICE confronted 19-year-old Merwil Gutierrez in New York City. When they confronted him, they thought he was someone else. And they knew right away he wasn't the guy they were looking for. According to his cousin, one agent said, "No, he's not the one." And the other said, "Take him anyway." Gutierrez has no criminal record. He was in the country legally pursuing asylum. He doesn't even have tattoos. But somehow he was sent to El Salvador anyway. So I have no idea how he passed that stupid checklist. Like maybe he was just head to toe wearing Chicago Bulls clothing. I don't know. It's not clear why. But somehow he got sent to El Salvador even though he didn't even have tattoos and he wasn't the guy they were looking for and he had no criminal record and there was nothing suspicious about him at all. And he was there legally. Good stuff. Okay. Now, this is not El Salvador. This is just general ICE dickheadery. I'm gonna play a lot from News 4 here because News 4 did the work in Oklahoma. It's a very Oklahoma-heavy episode. A woman and her 3 daughters had just moved into an Oklahoma house 2 weeks earlier. Then one morning, about 20 men armed with guns busted through the door. From here, we're going to take the story from News 4 in Oklahoma. Go for it.
Fear.
Because I did feel at times I felt I was going to die.
So much fear.
I kept praying. I said, God, please let me live through this moment.
Humiliation.
I was a zero. I was nothing.
Pure disbelief.
I just couldn't understand how is this happening to us.
All just for wanting a fresh start.
You come to Oklahoma and you get treated like this. For what?
This woman, who we're calling Marissa, and her 3 daughters came to Oklahoma from Maryland looking for a slower, more affordable pace of life. They rented this house in a nice, seemingly safe northwest Oklahoma City neighborhood. Her husband planned to join them this past weekend, but any semblance they had of comfort went out the window when 20 men armed to the teeth busted through it Thursday morning.
I don't know who they were. They had guns. It was dark. All the lights were off.
They were federal agents, Marissa says, with the U.S. Marshals, ICE, and the FBI.
And I kept asking them, like, who are you? What are you doing here? What's happening? And they said, we have a warrant for the house.
They ordered Marissa and her daughters outside into the rain before they could even get dressed.
They wanted me to change in front of all of them, in between all of them.
The thing is, the suspect names on that search warrant were not Marissa's or anyone in her family's. They were, however, names listed on mail still arriving at the house. Former residents, perhaps.
We just moved here from Maryland. We're citizens. That's what I kept saying. We're citizens.
She says they didn't care.
We weren't criminals. Why were they treating us like criminals? We were here by ourselves. That we didn't do anything.
The agents ripped apart every square inch of the house, taking their phones, laptops, documents, and their life savings in cash as evidence.
I have to feed my children. I'm gonna need gas money. I need to be able to get around. Like, how do you just leave me like this, like an abandoned dog?
So she pointed out they had the wrong people and they were citizens and she had proof. She said the agents didn't care. Now, she said they have quite literally nothing. They have nothing. The agents took it all. She said, when are we going to get our stuff back? They said it could be days or it could be months. She said she has no idea who to contact to get her things back. The US Marshal Service says that their team was not involved. They told News 4 that they were aware of the operation before it happened, but did not assist in any capacity. An FBI spokesperson says that they were only assisting on this case and directed inquiries to Homeland Security. A spokesman for Homeland Security said that they're looking into it and will get back to News 4, but they never got back to News 4. As for this woman's phones, electronics, cash, she's got no idea which agency has those belongings or how to get those items back. And she's got a news station helping her out. What happens for the people who don't have news stations? What happens for people who can't speak English very well? She speaks English perfectly. She's just, standard American. She's not a migrant. She's not, but she can't find out what's going on. What happens if you're a legal immigrant, like you're a citizen, a naturalized citizen, and you have a heavy accent and your English isn't great? What happens to you then? This is not a good situation. That is cut and dry. But sometimes it's more complicated. This is still a horror story, but it's more complicated. At least more complicated than the press makes out. There were stories last week about a 2-year-old US citizen being deported to Honduras with no meaningful process. There was another story about 2 other US citizen children being deported. They were aged 4 and 7. This is what Marco Rubio had to say about those examples.
3 U.S. citizens, ages 4, 7, and 2, were not deported. Their mothers, who are legally in this country, were deported. The children went with their mothers. If those children are U.S. citizens, they can come back into the United States if there's their father or someone here who wants to assume them. But ultimately, who was deported was their mothers who were here illegally. The children just went with their mothers. But it wasn't like, you guys make it sound like ICE agents kicked down the door and grabbed the 2-year-old and threw him on an airplane. That's misleading.
Yeah.
That's just not true.
Just to be clear, because I do want to get to the overhaul at the State Department, is it the U.S. policy to deport children, even U.S. citizens, with their families, and I hear what you're saying, without due process? Just to be very clear there.
Well, no. Again, if someone's in this country unlawfully, illegally, that person gets deported. If that person is with a 2-year-old child or has a 2-year-old child and says, I want to take my child with me, well, then you have 2 choices. You can say, yes, of course you can take your child, whether they're a citizen or not, because it's your child. Or you can say, yes, you can go, but your child must stay behind. And then your headlines would read, U.S. holding hostage 2-year-old, 4-year-old, 7-year-old while mother deported. So the parents make that choice. I imagine those 3 U.S. citizen children have fathers here in the United States. Yeah. They can stay with their father. That's up to their family to decide where the children go. Children go with their parents. Parents decide where their children go. Right. The U.S. deported their mothers who were illegally in America.
Gotta hand it to Rubio. The guy is slick. He knows how to spin. He knows how to clean up on aisle deportation. Was it what did Elle call him? The Janitor-In-Chief. To be honest, I find Rubio's point quite convincing. He's right, isn't he? That if they're allowed to come back into the country, they haven't been deported. They're just going with their parents. And what do we expect? Do we expect the government to separate them from their parents? Is that what we expect? Wouldn't we be complaining about that if they separated the children from their parents? If you're deporting the parents and the parents choose to take their kids with them, that's not deporting the kids. That's just the kids going with their parents. I think Rubio makes a good point. Except it's more complicated than that. Firstly, in the case of the 2-year-old in Honduras, the judge was not just any judge. It was Terry Doughty. And if you've been paying very close attention to PEP, or any legal podcast for the last few years, you would have heard that name a few times. Terry Doughty he was the original guy who was pushing the Facebook censorship case that the Supreme Court slapped down last year. The Facebook and the administration getting together to censor COVID deniers and people who are anti-vax and that kind of stuff. Terry Doughty is an appointee who is so conservative. The Conservatives often judge shop in his district. So they'll pick his district to file in so they can win the case because they figure he's so conservative. That's how conservative he is. And he scheduled a hearing for May 16 in the interest of dispelling our strong suspicion that the government just deported a US citizen with no meaningful process. That's what he said. I don't think he's a fan of illegal immigrants, but he was pulling up the Trump administration. Doughty was worried that the toddler had been deported against her father's wishes. And it's hard to know because ICE prevented the mother from speaking with her lawyers or making arrangements with family members for the care of her child. So this is where it gets more complicated. They did notify the father that both the mother and the child had been taken into ICE custody, but that they would not tell him their whereabouts. The mother was apparently eventually granted less than a minute on the phone with her husband before the call was abruptly terminated when he tried to provide legal counsel's phone numbers, according to the ACLU. Quote, he barely had any opportunity to speak with the mother about what was best for the child before they hang up, said the ACLU. Government attorneys had assured legal counsel that a legal call would be arranged within 24 to 48 hours with her, as well as a call with a family member. But just after the courts closed for the day, ICE suddenly changed their mind and informed counsel that the family would be deported at 6 a.m. the next morning before the court reopened. What a coincidence that is. The family filed a habeas corpus petition and motion for a temporary restraining order. Bills never ruled on because they were deported before the courts opened. Now, you can't tell me that that wasn't done on purpose to frustrate legal scrutiny. These people, I'm talking ICE, are so concerned about stopping the courts having any supervision over them whatsoever. They will break any bond. They will do anything they can to work around it, to fudge it. It's extremely frustrating. Why won't you follow the damn law? I don't get it. In the other story, by the way, the one with the two kids, ICE held the families out of contact, refusing or failing to respond to multiple attempts by attorneys and family members to contact them. This, even though ICE knew that the 4-year-old boy, did I mention, he had stage 4 cancer. He ended up leaving the country without access to his cancer medication, along with his 7-year-old sister, who was also a US citizen. Also, by the way, the mum is pregnant as well, and ICE proceeded with her deportation without ensuring any continuity of prenatal care or medical oversight. The mother didn't consent to any of this, according to her attorney. She didn't sign anything. She didn't write anything. She didn't consent to anything expressly. The entire time she was trying very aggressively to speak to her lawyer, but she wasn't being allowed. Once again, trying to frustrate legal scrutiny, which they have a right to obtain. Both families had possible immigration relief, but because ICE denied them access to their attorneys, legal counsel was unable to assist and advise them in time. Note, this breaks ICE's own policies, quote, which mandate coordination for the care of minor children with willing caretakers, regardless of immigration status when deportations are being carried out. And remember, the administration's official line is, if you look at the manifest of these flights of people that are being deported, these are some of the most vile human beings imaginable that we're getting out of our country. Sex offenders, rapists, killers. That's what Rubio said. Remember that? That's who we're prioritising being sent out. So yes, it is true that the whole deporting a 2-year-old citizen thing is very misleading. As a story, when a news outlet runs with, they deported a 2-year-old citizen, that is misleading. That's poor journalism. But completely mistreating a 2-year-old citizen, a 4-year-old citizen with stage 4 cancer, and a 7-year-old citizen is that is exactly what they're doing. And not to mention mistreating a 2-year-old child and a 4-year-old child with stage 4 cancer and a 7-year-old child, which is no better. It's not a problem to mistreat them just because they're citizens. They're 2 years old. Depriving both the children and their mothers of their basic rights, that's what happened. Okay, so that is a spot-on headline if you say that's what they did. What links both these stories, of course, is once again that ICE are allergic to due process. And this is what you see over and over again. This administration is allergic to due process, and it's creating some monstrous situations. And by the way, before I finish, Rep. Pamela Jayapal, she introduced an amendment to Trump's budget bill, which states that none of the funds in this bill may be used by ICE to detain or deport US citizens. She said, whether you're a Democrat or Republican, I hope we can all agree that US citizens should never be detained by ICE or any agency conducting civil immigration enforcement. They certainly should not be deported, she said. What do you reckon happened? The House Republicans killed it. Now, I know she's been cheeky. I know that was a political measure. I understand that. But she's kind of right. ICE shouldn't be able to use funds to deport or detain US citizens. Even though I don't think they were deporting or detaining these kids. Well, if they gave them proper legal representation and they gave them proper due process, they wouldn't necessarily be deporting and detaining the kids. They're just leaving the kids with the mum. But of course, that's not what they did. When you deprive them of due process, when you deprive them of speaking to their father to arrange alternative care, when you deprive them of speaking to their lawyer, then you are detaining them. You're holding them against their will, aren't you? And they could be with their father. You're stopping them from going to their father. So you are detaining them. So actually, no, even though they didn't deport them, they did detain them. Detain a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old and a 7-year-old citizen. So yeah, so I guess they did. But anyway, my point is, it shouldn't be hard, even though it's a troll, for Republicans to say, no, we're not going to fund the detaining and deportation of citizens, at least not the deporting of citizens. But they didn't. So you can draw whatever conclusions you like. That will do. I told you I wouldn't be long. It's only 10, 15 minutes. There you go. I'm capable of a short extra. I'll see you guys on Friday when Dave will be back. And I hear that a lot of you guys are struggling to catch up with it because we had a few 5-hour podcasts recently. I'm trying to keep them shorter for you, just for you guys. So I hope you appreciate that. Until Friday, stay peppy.